The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is one of my favorite games ever made. The mechanics in open world were some of the best to explore and experiment with for anything I've ever played. In my opinion, it blows Breath of the Wild out of the water in every single aspect, and one of those just so happens to be with its shrines. Not only is there 152 instead of the 120 seen in Breath of the Wild, but I found the shrines in this game to be significantly more entertaining. A lot of that has to do with Link's brand new abilities in Tears of the Kingdom, as I felt they led to significantly more interesting puzzles and challenges. However, with so many shrines, some were bound to be worse than others, so today, to celebrate hitting 150,000 subscribers, I'm going to be ranking all 152 shrines in Tears of the Kingdom from the worst to the best. Now, how exactly am I going to be ranking these? There are quite a few things to consider, so let's run through them really fast. Primarily, it comes down to how fun and creative each shrine is. Was the puzzle unique and was solving it fun are some of the primary questions I'll be asking. The amount of possible solutions will also be considered, as this game has a strong focus on creativity, so having more options is always nice. Many shrines in this game can also be cheesed, but some cheese is fun while others feel kind of dumb, so that can also play a role in its ranking. Length is also quite important. If a shrine has a good idea but does almost nothing with it, that'll lose some points. On the other hand though, longer shrines will generally be placed higher as there is more content to go through. I'll also consider each shrine's hidden chest for the ranking as well. I won't mention all of them, but I'll make sure to highlight the ones I find particularly interesting or particularly lame. The last thing I want to point out has to do with the blessing shrines. Normally all of a shrine's content are within the structure itself, so it's very clear where it starts and ends. The blessings, however, generally have their challenge outside of the shrine itself. For those shrines, I'll be judging the quest required to unlock the shrine, that way we don't have to just judge the inside and have the bottom 50 spots all be the same thing. For normal shrines, I won't be considering where they're hidden or placed in the world, as they're not usually that notable. And of course, this video is just my opinion, which also brings me to something that came up while making this. See, as I was outlining this video, I just so happened to look at my YouTube notifications and saw this. So it seems like P Jiggles is also planning on making a shrine ranking in the future. I felt kind of bad about this since I've had my videos overlap with other people before.
I just can't do it. I can't.
So I'm just gonna say right out the bat to go watch his video when it comes out. If you enjoy this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy his as well. Anyways, all of the footage from this video, unless specifically stated, will all be coming from my first playthrough of the game. So if you see any stupid decisions in the gameplay, it's because I'm stupid. How I play through each shrine will likely also have a large effect on my ranking of it. And since I thought it could be fun, if you want to see my playthrough of how I beat some of these shrines, I uploaded a massive uncommented video of me going through every shrine on my second channel, which is linked in the description. But anyways, long intro aside, if you enjoy, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you all again for 150,000 subscribers, and let's get right into the ranking. Alright, so you know how I said I didn't want to fill up the bottom of the list with just a bunch of blessing shrines? Well, I lied. Okay, it's not all 50 blessing shrines, only 9 of them. But what about them makes me think that they're the worst? There's literally nothing to them. These are all placed in locations where I would expect a normal shrine to be located, but instead of containing actual content, it's just a blessing. For some of these, I legitimately can't tell you what the challenge was supposed to be. If you squint at some of these, you can sort of come up with something, but really, these just all feel lazy. So for 152, we have Raru's Blessing, Meowek Shrine. Okay, let me just say, unless it's a blessing shrine, I'll be skipping the secondary name here because I predict I'll pronounce all of them wrong. Speaking of secondary, I thought it would be fun to include when I completed each shrine, since this game is very non-linear. So this number here will show you when I completed the shrine. So for example, this one was the 124th shrine I completed. This shrine is found in the Lanayru wetlands, and all you have to do is climb up this hill, enter Bone Pond East Cave, and that's it. Yeah, all of these bottom 9 are going to be like that. 151, Raru's Blessing, Otutsum Shrine. This is located in the Gerudo Highlands, requiring you to go through this bit of snow, and that's it. How very interesting. I'll put this above the last one because at least you could say that freezing weather can be a small challenge. But I mean, come on. As long as you have a fire Kisai on your shield, you'll be fine. Plus, there are plenty of other shrines in freezing areas that actually have content inside. 150, Raru's Blessing, Ninji Shrine. No wait, Ninji? Like Mario? This is located in the Lost Woods and requires the player to skydive on top of it. If you try to approach it from the sides, then Link will get lost, so I guess it's mildly interesting that this is the only way to do it. But again, there are plenty of other actual shrines you have to skydive onto to enter. 149, Raru's Blessing, Taki Ihaban Shrine. This was actually the first blessing shrine I found in my playthrough. Really not a good introduction. This is found in Linder's Brow Cave in Hyrule Ridge. It's an extremely straightforward path though, there's pretty much no way you could miss it. Despite walking to the shrine likely being easier than the last 3, there is an obstacle here that I can understand, that being the Phantom Ganon hands. The shrine still deserves to be down here though, because I didn't even notice them until after I left. where I then promptly got destroyed. 148, Raru's Blessing, Irasak Shrine. This is located at the edge of the Gerudo Desert. Now that may seem like it could be a decent challenge to reach, but if you go to complete the Lightning Temple, you go pretty much right next to it. Sure, the map does go all fuzzy, which gives this an edge over the last 4, but that's really not saying much. 147, Raru's Blessing, Miyahisik Shrine. Located in Hateno Village, this acts as the tutorial for the shrine detector on the Pura pad. Since it's meant to be a tutorial, I decided to give it a bit of leeway, but it's really the same as the others. Just enter into the Retsam Forest Cave and you'll find it right away. But like I said, it's a tutorial, so I guess it can get his tiny pass. Also, Robbie sucks. He would just not let me leave for like 3 minutes. Please just let me go. It's outside. 146, Raru's Blessing, Bamatok Shrine. This is located inside of Mount Dunzel Cave. What puts this above the last few is that there are a few enemies and a slippery wall. Slippery walls are very annoying to climb, but it's something. 145, Raru's Blessing, Susub Shrine. This shrine is found in the Dia Village Ruins East Well, where it's essentially the same as our last shrine. I like this a bit better though, as instead of constantly slipping on the wall, you have the option to ride up this waterfall with Azora armor, making this significantly less annoying. 144, Raru's Blessing, Jogo Shrine. This is located in the Laneru Road East Cave. This ends our Slippery Wall trilogy. While you can go through the headache-inducing climb, if you use the cave, you can actually glide into the place where the shrine is located. It's not much puzzle solving, but compared to the other bottom shrines, I'll take any crumb of content I can. 143, Courage to Fall. We're free! Finally! No more blessing shrines! So now that we have our first actual shrine, why is it so low? I just think it's stupid. This will probably be my most controversial ranking, maybe, because unlike these other low tier shrines, this does actually have some content. This shrine starts out with some massive doors that Link will need to open with Ultra Hand. Seeing as there are a bunch of lasers on the other side, and activating them in every other shrine leads to Link's death, it makes sense for him to want to go around. By going to the left, Link can use Ascend to enter into the main room of the shrine. This has Link faced with another door filled with lasers, so they are placed in a way where Link can easily crouch under them. Once you get past those lasers though, you sort of run into some problems, so you need a key to unlock this door with the orb to complete the shrine. Thing is, nowhere in this massive room is there a key. I personally spent several minutes just wandering around in here hoping to find something useful. I did eventually find a chest under a grate, but had no idea how I was supposed to reach it. It wasn't until I completed several laps around this room that I finally found the solution out of my sheer boredom. Unlike every other shrine in the game, the lasers in this one are actually the solution. Yeah, I just don't like this. You're conditioned to believe that lasers will kill you by literally every other shrine, so this being a reverse is kind of annoying. Add on that the room here is pretty big, and it can lead to players, like myself, just thinking they missed something in this massive space. I'm sure some people like the idea here and that's fine, but for me, I just wasn't a huge fan. Plus, it's not even like this has much content even if you know the actual solution. The rest of this shrine is nothing that crazy either, just using a plane to move the orb to the goal. So that's why this is my personal least favorite actual shrine. 142, A Well-Timed Bounce. Back to shrines that are low because they're lacking in content, but since this is a real shrine, there is actually a puzzle here. What you have to do is use recall on this moving platform so that it launches this ball into the target. While that idea is pretty solid, you literally just have to do this once. I have no clue why they decided to not expand on the shrine at all, because there was some potential here. But that's also not the only problem. In fact, this is our first shrine to introduce a mechanic that ruins or severely hurts every shrine it's included in. See, this target platform is meant to activate when something like this sphere hits it, which makes sense. But for some reason, if you fuse a bomb to your arrows, that can also activate it. That goes for every single target platform in the game, which are pretty common in shrines. I have zero clue why they decided to include this, because there's no shrine where using a bomb arrow is the intended solution. This is, in my opinion, a bad type of cheese, because every single time you see a target, you just pull out your bow and hit it with a bomb. That's not interesting or creative in the slightest, and since that's so easy, every shrine with this target platform is hurt because this cheese solution is so accessible. Be prepared for this to come up often, because this target element is far from being uncommon. Oh, and just to add on even more to the shrine, the chest here gives you bombs, so now you can cheese it with no worries about being low on them. Yeah, everything but the idea here is bad, which is what lands this shrine so low. 141, Wind Power. Once again, we have another shrine that is just one simple puzzle that doesn't really get expanded on. When you enter the shrine, you have a wheel in front of you along with 2 fans. You need to use these fans to activate all of the things along the circle, though you have to do it quickly as they'll stop moving if they don't receive wind power for a few seconds. There are a few different ways to do this, but I just attached them to the fan like this and quickly walked around the circle with Ultra Hand. Right after you do that, the shrine is done, so once again, it's a very short one. The chest is also notably quite lame. All you have to do is place down a fan. Like, this is what I would expect from the fan tutorial shrine, but even that one had a chest that was much more interesting. The reason this gets to place above the last one is just because this doesn't have the target to get cheesed. Still though, I'm not really a fan. 140, Rose Blessing Papung Shrine. Alright, unlike our other blessing shrines so far, this one does actually have a challenge attached to it. It's just that the challenge is very easy. This is located in the Lost Woods, and you have to give this Korok 5 golden apples. Now sure, if you don't have any, finding golden apples can be somewhat challenging.
Oh my god!
By the time you get here, you're probably gonna have more than enough. So for most people, this shrine is just picking up the rock and moving it to its spot. Definitely a bit better than the other blessing shrines, though not much more than that. 139, Stacking a Path. First off, getting into the shrine was a massive challenge. For this shrine, you just ascend through the ceiling and then use recall on a block to ascend to the end. That's not how you're supposed to do it, but it's so easy I can't see a reason to do it the normal way. This can be completed within literal seconds, chest included. 138, A Balanced Plan. What you're supposed to do is make sure the weights on one side of the platform are heavy enough to keep it in place for Link to run up it, or you can just tell the platforms to stop. This shrine is also super short too. The chest is at least somewhat interesting though, as it requires a bit of extra platform shenanigans, which saves it from being lower. 137, A Retraced Path. This shrine has a ball roll down a slope, and you have to hit this switch and use recall, and that's it. Oh, but the chest! You just use Ascend. This is definitely the shrine ever. This would be a lot lower on this list had it not been for the lead up to this shrine being kind of cool. I know I said I'd be ignoring the lead ups to most shrines, but if they have a puzzle clearly required to get to them, then I decided to add them on. This isn't anything too special though, just requiring the player to bomb some rocks in this cave to deflood it. It's nothing much, but this shrine really needed all it could get. Okay, now we have 7 shrines that I'm sure you all expected to be quite low, those being the combat training shrines. These are just meant to be tutorials for different obscure combat mechanics, which are nice to have, but since that's literally all these are, it's hard to argue they deserve to be placed higher on this list. I mean, it's better than the 5 billion Test of Strength shrines in Breath of the Wild. 136, Combat Training Throwing 10 of 10 Shrine. Observant viewers may notice that I actually said the secondary name for this shrine, as for some reason there are 2 Combat Training Throwing shrines, with the other being 135, Combat Training Throwing Yamio Shrine. Both of these require the player to throw either a rusty halberd or a fire fruit at the tutorial construct. You have to do this twice, once on a stationary target and another on a moving target. This works as a good tutorial, but again, they're very simplistic compared to other shrines. I put these as the lowest combat training shrines because I really don't think there needed to be 2 of them. Yamio gets the edge of the 2 because it lets you get some fire fruit. 134, Combat Training Archery Makuruka Shrine. This is another combat training shrine to have 2 different versions with the same name. The other one is placed a bit higher though, which we'll get to in a minute, but as for this, it just forces you to headshot the training constructs. Not a very interesting tutorial, but I guess it's nice to show that there are indeed differences between normal and headshots. 133, Combat Training Shields. This gives you a tutorial on how to parry. Now that might sound useful, but personally I didn't feel the need to parry a single time in this game. That might just be me, but without the threat of guardians, I never saw a reason to. 132, Combat Training. Oh, that's just the whole title. This is a step up as it gives a tutorial on 3 things. First, the Flurry Rush, an incredibly helpful combat mechanic that I think will definitely need to be taught. The parry, which we already talked about, and the charge attack. Some of those are very helpful things to learn, so I think this was a good tutorial to have. 131, Combat Training Sneak Strike. Out of all the things in these tutorials, this one is definitely the most obscure, which is why I think it's great that it has its own tutorial. The Sneak Strike lets you do a ton of extra damage to an enemy you hit with it, which can be helpful throughout the game. However, of these combat training shrines, this was definitely the most annoying. Whoever decided to make the text in these unskippable, I hate you. Yeah, it's still going. They really made it last this long. They didn't need to do that. Why did they do that? 130, Combat Training Archery Tanhi Shrine. Finally, we've reached the last combat training shrine, which also happens to be the second archery one. This requires you to use bullet time to kill the training constructs, which is an important mechanic to learn. The reason this gets to be the highest combat training shrine though is because for some reason, this is locked behind a diving minigame. See, there are 3 shrines you'll need to unlock by diving in the sky, but I really don't understand why a combat training shrine would be one of them. You'd think they'd want to keep the combat training shrines easily accessible since they're meant to be a tutorial, but whatever I guess. This extra dive does make this combat training shrine have more content than the others, making this the best. 129, Lever Power. Alright, back to some actual shrines, and from this point on, the rankings get quite close. It wasn't uncommon for some shrines to move up or down 50 spots or so while I was ranking, so just keep in mind that this was really hard as most shrines are really fun. Anyway, back to the shrine at hand, this starts with 4 objects: a cup, ball, cube, and platform. Using these 4 items, you have to make a catapult to hit the first target, which then unlocks a second platform which you can use to hit the second target. Once you've done that, you can then launch yourself to the end of the shrine. This one is still pretty short, but unlike the ones lower than this, it does actually expand on the idea a little bit. Obviously they could have gone further with it, and this does also use targets, which means that bombs can once again give you free cheese. I also don't really like the chest here. It requires you to launch yourself then fly backwards to get it, which isn't that interesting of a challenge, just forces you to launch yourself twice. 128, shape rotation. This is another one that I think might be a smidge controversial, as I just don't like completing it. It starts out with a platform and a hole in the wall, and what you have to do is turn the platform with Ultra Hand to slide it through. Then you have to do the same thing with 2 attached cubes. This can also be used to get a chest in the first room. I definitely did this in the, intended method. After you do that, then you have to try and stick the cubes into this other hole in the wall to reach the end. I'm a bit stupid though, so it took me about 5 years. Once you finally do that, it's just a simple walk up to the end. This is a decent showcase of the rotation mechanic behind Ultra Hand, but personally, I still found this to be quite short, and it felt more like spamming the rotation until it worked. But again, that's probably just because I'm stupid. 127, the way up. This shrine is all about using Ultra Hand and ascend. In the first room, you simply place the platform on the bars and ascend through it. In the second room, I used recall to keep the platform in the air to ascend through. And in the third room, I cheated. Yeah, this shrine is pretty boring. The idea isn't that creative either, so it's far from a highlight. I will say though, I did quite like getting the chest here, which requires you to put a platform onto spikes, hold up another platform in the sky, and then use recall to ascend on it. Not the craziest chest, sure, but a pretty good one using the shrine's mechanics, so that helped boost it up higher than it would have been otherwise. 126, fire and water. Despite the name, you actually don't need either of those things to pass the shrine. Here's a tutorial on how to actually beat this shrine. Okay, yeah, I just cheated this one. But to be fair, this was more fun than the actual solution. What you're supposed to do is just place a block to get across the water, then place 2 blocks to ascend to the end. So yeah, pretty forgettable. 125, building bridges. As the name implies, you have to use Ultra Hand to create several bridges for Link to reach the end. The first bridge acts as a tutorial, just attach it to the other end to cross. The next bridge is significantly longer, which requires you to... Okay, I just cheated the rest of these. By simply holding the bridge up for a few seconds and using recall, you can get past not only this bridge, but the other one you'd have to build as well. That makes this shrine incredibly easy, but even then, it's not that hard to do without cheesing like this. I do like how the chest requires you to attach the middle of the bridge to something rather than the end. It's not hard, but it's nice to see a unique use of the bridge item. 124, moving the spheres. This shrine contains 3 rooms, each separated with a big gap, and each room has a large sphere. Link has to use these spheres in order to cross these gaps. If you saw how I solved the last shrine, I'm sure you can guess that I just used recall. With that, this shrine is very simple to complete, and also not that interesting. The chest is hidden in a good spot though, being a breakable wall underneath the second room's platform, but besides that, this is pretty boring. It is slightly harder than the bridges though, which gave it an advantage. 123, wings on the wind. This is about using the wing item for transportation. There are quite a few shrines like this though, and I felt that this was the weakest. The opening room requires you to use a plane to get an orb into the holder. Or if you're awesome like me, you could just go ballin'. So after using a plane to get the orb across, you then have to use a plane and fan to get across a big gap. The chest is also in this room, but it's incredibly boring, so it's not even worth a mention. Yeah, this shrine is just very generic. Flying is kind of fun though, so I will give it that. 122, force transfer. I'm an idiot. So when I did this shrine, I didn't realize this thing was a switch, so I just brute forced this thing without it. While that might sound like a lot of trouble, honestly this shrine was still pretty easy regardless. Normally you have to use this pole to connect the gears and open this gate, but I just used Ultra Hand and walked through. Then you have to use the spinning gears to knock these platforms up to reach the end, or you could just descend through them and climb a pole. Honestly, neither the intended method nor my stupid method were particularly interesting. I will say though, the chest was pretty fun, as you have to attach these poles together to get it down, which isn't seen pretty much in any other shrine. But yeah, this one is just kind of whatever. 121, drifting flame. Starting this shrine out, you're trapped in a small room with a torch and an unlit torch on the ceiling. I just used an arrow to light it, but there is a torch on the floor you could use instead. That's just to introduce you to the main goal of this shrine though, as the next room contains the real and final puzzle. This room has a torch at the far right and a button directly in front of you that lowers the platform. Now that's not all this button does, as it also causes unlit torches to spawn from these 3 things above the platform, which is the main goal of the room. Sadly, I decided to turn my camera literally frames before they spawned. So I then had to spend a few minutes just scrambling around the room looking for what to do. At least I found the chest, I guess, which is honestly not in a very interesting spot. Anyway, what you have to do is have something on the pressure plate and then light the 3 torches on the ceiling. There are a few ways to do this, but I just dropped a weapon and shot them with fire fruits. Overall, this is still an incredibly short shrine, but it's definitely more puzzly than what we've seen so far. I just wish I didn't waste my time having my camera pointed directly down. Why did I do that? 120, Raru's Blessing, Tenmatin Shrine. This one is simply located in Elma Knoll's Well. Well, if it's just placed at the end of this, why does this get to place so much higher than the other blessing shrines that are just in the open? Well, this area is shrouded in complete darkness. well. It's a small tweak, sure, but it's at least something. The well is also decently big, so getting across the water does take a bit of time. Still certainly on the lower end of blessing shrines, but it's not bad. 119, Rora's Blessing, Ikatak Shrine. Here we have our second blessing shrine to require moving the stone. The platform is placed right above several holes in the ground, and inside of them is a cave area filled with some enemies in the stone. Now you don't need to defeat the enemies, but I decided to consider them as part of the challenge anyway. Once you defeat them, all you have to do is attach some rockets to the shrine rock to get it to the surface. Launching it into the sky and having it crash back down is quite fun, but it's also not very difficult, so I'm keeping it lower on the list. 118, the right a target.
Bomb.
Yeah, like I've said before, it's really a shame that they had to implement that bomb arrow thing. The shrine involves attaching the balls in the right way so that they hit the target sliding down a slope. That's pretty cool, but yeah, everything here gets bomb cheesed, even the chest. The idea also isn't the most creative thing in the world either. There are of course more shrines with targets later, but they get carried a bit by their idea, whereas this one is just kind of whatever. 117, Spinning Gears. This uses a combination of gears and recall to solve its two puzzles. The first one, you simply use recall on the gear to make it go in the opposite direction, allowing the orb to go into its holder. In the next room, you have to crank the gear with Ultra Hand and then use recall to go up it, and that's it. Yeah, this shrine is super short for no reason. This definitely should have had a few more gear-related puzzles. The only thing saving this shrine is the chest, as it is actually really well hidden. Instead of going up with this gear, if you instead follow the gear down, you'll be dropped into a secret room with the chest in it. I think that's a fantastic way to use the shrine's gimmick for the chest. So yeah, this has a good idea and a really good chest, but it just needed to be expanded on. 116, Ride the Winds. Unlike most other shrines, there's really no puzzle element to this one. Essentially, it's just a big obstacle course with a paraglider. First you have to cross a small gap, then move around some lasers, then fall into an ice platform, and finally move past these constructs to the end. As you can see, it's very simple, but the length is pretty solid, so it's an okay shrine. I do think they probably could have come up with a slightly more interesting obstacle course though. 115, Roru's Blessing, Ususum Shrine. This is our first of many blessing shrines that require us to fight a boss. While I do like them most of the time, since the bosses in this game do have some pretty fun combat mechanics, this one is just a fight against a Hinox, and on top of that, it's a generic red Hinox. I mean, I'm assuming it doesn't level up with you, seeing as this was the 133rd shrine I got. Saying this fight was easy by that point would be an understatement. It really just depends on when you get to this shrine, I guess, which is why I put it here, since this could be some trouble if it's one of the first shrines you travel to. 114, Roru's Blessing, Enoma Shrine. For this one, pretty much all you have to do is grab this shrine rock from a sky island and fall all the way down into the water below. I think the idea for this one is pretty cute, but there's really not that much effort involved in actually doing this. My brother did mention that if you start from the cave, it can be slightly more interesting as the beam just shoots straight upward, but for me, I was just exploring sky islands and happened to stumble upon the stone first. Again, not a bad shrine, there's just not much to this. 113, Roru's Blessing, Rutafu'um Shrine. This is another blessing shrine that doesn't really take that much effort, but is a cute idea. This takes place in the Herba Mountains, and first requires the player to kill the enemies in the cave. Technically, you don't have to, but it makes the shrine much easier. Once you're done with the fight, you may notice that inside the freezing lake there's a shrine rock, but it's unfortunately too deep to grab with Ultra Hand normally. In order to solve this, I personally made the Zelda equivalent of one of those stretchy hand toys to grab the rock. Oh huh, those things are also called Ultra Hands. Wait. But yeah, once you pull the rock out of the pond, you're basically done, but it's a decent puzzle on its own. 112, Backtrack. This acts as a pretty simple showcase of the recall ability. Honestly, you may even be able to mix it up for the shrine meant to show off recall. There are 3 puzzles here. The first one, you just have to use recall on this platform so it goes up instead of down. The second one requires you to light these torches. Now you could go on this raft and then recall it to get fire, or you could just use a fire fruit to move on. The chest is also in this room, but in my opinion, it's kind of weird as it doesn't really use recall at all. Instead, you just have to set these leaves on fire. Personally, I would have liked it if it did something with recall, seeing as that is what this shrine is all about, but whatever, I guess. The last puzzle of this shrine is pretty cool though. You have an orb and 2 holders for it, each opening a different gate. So you have to put the ball into the 2 holders, then use recall so you can go through the gates as the ball opens them. So this shrine has one pretty good puzzle, but the other 2 are either basic or easily cheesable. It certainly doesn't help that there are quite a few simple recall shrines, but that last puzzle is pretty good, so I'll give it some credit there. Speaking of recall shrines, 111, the ability to rewind. This is the first of the 4 required ability shrines. Despite them being placed at the very start of the game, I actually feel like a lot of them are pretty solid. This one is definitely the weakest though. It only has 2 puzzles and they're both pretty simple. First, you have to use recall on a raft to go up a waterfall. Basically the same way the last one started, but this is a bit more fun due to how the raft waves around. Once you get up there, you can go for the chest, which unlike the last one actually requires you to use recall, so I like it a bit more. The final puzzle is pretty interesting though, requiring you to recall one of the clock's hands so that it moves in sync with the other. This is pretty fun to do, even if I messed up a few times. The reason I like this one better is because of A, the chest, and B, the fact that this is meant to be the actual tutorial, so the other one feels a bit unnecessary. 110, Rise and Fall. Just in case you thought we were done with the recall-centric shrines, don't you worry, as we still have one more to go. This is more about using recall in a specific way though, rather than just being a tutorial for the ability as a whole, which puts it above the other two. This has 3 different puzzles. For the first one, you have to launch a platform and then use recall to ride on top of it. Pretty similar to how the other two started, but there's at least the extra element of having to activate the platform first. That then brings you to a block which you not only have to use to get the chest, but also reach the final room. Much like the other shrines, this room is my favorite. While this ending puzzle probably isn't as good as the other two, it's still solid. You enter into this last room and are met with another button that activates a launcher. However, you can't recall the launcher itself, so you have to find a block hidden in the room and place it on, which you could then recall to fly to the end. I like that this shrine was a bit more focused than the other two, but really they're all just about the same difficulty and creativity wise. 109, a flying device. Plane shrine number 2. While this does take a bit of a hit due to there being so many shrines about this element, I kind of like how this one is set up. This not only teaches you about the wings, but also how it interacts with a few other objects that are essential in building planes throughout the game. First you start with the regular wings by themselves, but then you have to attach the cart element to it. Planes won't fly if they can't move on the ground, which is a very important thing to teach, so I appreciate this shrine showing how you could possibly get around that issue. After you've constructed a plane with wheels, you then have to add a fan to it to reach the end. Before you go though, the chest is also here. I definitely did this in the intended method.
Huh?
But yeah, this shrine, while still quite basic, acts as a good way to teach the player about the wing's mechanics. It is still a bit hurt due to how many wing-based shrines there are, but this is definitely solid. 108, turbine power. The puzzle here is kind of fun, but pretty straightforward. To start off, you first need to power the spinning element in the center by using the metal platform. Then you have to add a fan element to the spinner. Once you get that attached, it gives you access to the higher levels of the shrine, giving you a chest and some flame emitters. Attach one of those to the turbine in the middle, and you're able to light all of the torches and finish off the shrine. Like I said, pretty short and simple, but it was fun enough to run through. Plus the fire tornado looks kinda cool. 107, Orbs of Water. As the name suggests, this acts as a showcase for the Orbs of Water, which are important elements leading up to the water temple. This shrine also takes place in low gravity, so Link will fall slower. I'm sure others may find this annoying, but I personally enjoy messing around with this. Sadly though, I can't really say I enjoy messing with the Orbs of Water themselves. This pretty much has 4 different things you need to solve. The first room just shows that you can ride inside of the orb, a pretty basic tutorial. The second puzzle has you use recall in the orb, but since you can't do it while inside of the orb, you have to quickly jump into it before the recall's freeze time runs out. Honestly, I do like this one, it's a cute little puzzle. Then you just have to ride an orb of water horizontally. For this final puzzle, you have to make the orb of water bounce upwards so you can glide across the gap to the end. This took me way longer than it should have, but regardless, I think the puzzles here are just sort of okay. There's nothing about them that especially stands out in my mind, but I will give it a few bonus points for using an element not seen in any other shrine. 106, Raru's Blessing, Joku-U Shrine. This shrine is located within the thick clouds of Pharaon, which is kind of cool, but I personally didn't find it too terribly difficult to reach. I just sort of glided into it after making a hot air balloon, but I can understand someone putting this up higher if they choose to go through the islands normally. 105, Raru's Blessing, Gikaku Shrine. This takes place on the Sky Mine, and you have to soar between several different sky islands using the catapults that are often found on them. It's pretty fun to get flung between the different islands. There are even a few constructs with rocket arrows to stop you on your way up. Once you finally get up to the top, you'll find the shrine stone on an island filled with a bunch of luminous stones. When you get the stone, you then have to throw it all the way back down to where you started, which is quite fun as well. Overall, a pretty simple shrine, but one I would say I had fun doing. I do have to say though, this could have been a lot better. Directly next to the shrine rock, there's one of the giant sky balls, which creates a new minigame with the catapults as you have to try and angle it in just the right way to land a heavy cube inside of it to activate the ball's spin. This was actually really fun to do, and it's a bit more tricky than it may seem at first. Once you do it, you get rewarded with the Zonai Shin Guards, which is a good reward, don't get me wrong, but if this is where the shrine stone was placed, then I would have liked this shrine much more as it would have further expanded upon the catapult gimmick. As it is, it's still pretty solid, it just could have been better. 104, Raru's Blessing, Sihajog Shrine. In order to unlock this one, you need to complete one of the 3 diving minigames. These are pretty fun to do, so I enjoy this shrine a decent amount. Now, if you've been paying any attention, you may be a bit confused as to why this shrine is higher up than the combat training archery shrine you mentioned before, as that also involves the diving minigame. After all, that one actually had some content after the diving minigame, whereas this one was just a blessing. Well, first off, this dive is harder. But the main reason I put this one higher is because I find the combat training shrines to not really be that interesting since they're just tutorials, so it ends up up feeling like an extra chore rather than extra content. Now the third diving shrine is an actual shrine, which is why it's above these two, but I think just having nothing like this one is a bit better than having to do a tutorial afterwards. 103, the ability to rise. Speaking of tutorials, we have the shrine that's meant to teach us all about the ascend ability. I imagine of the 4 abilities, this is probably the most difficult to use for creative puzzles, but in all honesty, they do a decent job here. First you start by simply ascending through a ceiling, then you ascend through some pillars, one of which having a chest, which brings you to the more puzzle-oriented parts of the shrine. In this room you have to fight against a construct and then cut some ropes holding up a platform. There's also another pretty good chest in here, as you have to break the crates and then ascend from the hole they left behind. As I've said before, I like when the chest implements the shrine's gimmick into collecting it, and this is a good use of ascend. Finally, you have to use ascend on a moving platform to reach the end. Yeah, this is quite a basic tutorial, but I think they did a pretty good job showing off how you can use ascend throughout the game. 102, missing pathways. This expands upon the ascend ability a little bit by having the focus a lot more on parkour and creating your own paths. First, you start by simply ascending through a ceiling, which brings you to the first real puzzle. What you have to do is place this big block onto this lip so that you can ascend through both. Ascending through multiple objects wasn't really shown in the last shrine, so I'm happy it was shown off here. The chest is also in this room, requiring some parkour to get. I feel like there's another method, but I'm a bit too stupid to think of what that was, so anyway, the last room is a bit more interesting. You have to use ascend through a pillar, but since it's over water, there's no way to do that. What you have to do is grab out a block and place it under the pillar, but then the block is too tall to climb. So what you have to do then is ascend through where you just got the block, then jump onto that block and ascend to the end. I think that's a pretty good ending puzzle and a pretty good expansion on the ascend ability. 101, the power of water. This one is pretty short, but I think it's a creative enough idea. The goal for this shrine is to power the fan under this elevator so that you can reach the end, but the battery to turn it on is completely dead. In the room there is also a wheel and some water, however the wheel isn't moving because the water isn't hitting it, so you have to attach the nearby platform just the right way to get the platform spinning, which is pretty fun. This will allow you to charge the battery, which you can then use to get to the end. Before you do that though, you can also use it to get the chest by powering up this water at the side. Now I'm sure you can figure out a way to safely cross this, but electrocuting yourself is much more fun. Once you do that though, you can attach the battery and reach the end. Now yes, this shrine is incredibly short, but I do give it a tiny bit of leeway since the puzzle does take a decent amount of thinking and may not be immediately obvious. Still, it is just a bit too short to place much higher. Oh, and you could probably just cheese the whole thing with a rocket shield, but don't worry about that. 100, Proving Grounds Beginner. Well, it's about time we finally reach one of these shrines. If you remember the test of strength shrines from Breath of the Wild, I'd say that these are sort of meant as the replacements. That's not really doing these shrines justice though. I mean, those are basically all the exact same thing with very minor changes, but the Proving Grounds are all very different. Let's start with what they share though. Whenever you enter one of these shrines, you completely lose all of your equipment. Your goal is to defeat every enemy in the room to unlock the ending, but when you have to kill them, and the layout of the room completely changes for each of these shrines, which makes these actually quite fun to run through. I've heard some people are not huge fans of these, but I honestly like them quite a bit. It was fun to try and find the best way to take out these enemies, and some of them could be quite challenging as well. They'll be all over the place in the ranking, but to start us off, the beginner one makes the most sense to me. This has just 4 constructs and a basic selection of weapons. Obviously it has to be the lowest Proving Grounds, this is meant to be the baseline, but I think it's a pretty good starting point. 99, Proving Grounds Intermediate. This acts as a small step up from the beginner version. Now there are 7 constructs and the layout of the room is a bit more varied. Unlike the higher up Proving Grounds though, this doesn't really have a strong theme to it, which is why I'm keeping it near the beginner. 98, Proving Grounds Short Circuit. Like the last entry, this is a pretty basic setup for one of these. It does have a few walls, so you can maybe manage to get a sneak strike in if you're good, but besides that, this is a pretty generic Proving Grounds. 97, Proving Grounds Flow. This will be our last Proving Ground shrine for a little bit. Unlike the other 3 we've seen so far, this does have a pretty clear theme, as the constructs are all placed on rafts floating in the water. While this definitely does make for a pretty challenging shrine, in all honesty, I didn't really enjoy this one that much. Having to wait around for the rafts to move into position was pretty tedious, and so was swimming through the water. I would definitely understand people thinking the shrine deserves to be higher up, cause like I said, it is pretty challenging, but I'm putting it relatively low just because it was one of the only Proving Grounds I didn't have that much fun in personally. 96, Raru's Blessing, Sissy Ran Shrine. This blessing shrine takes place on the North Herba Mountains. This is one of the very few blessings where we can see the shrine rock from the shrine platform. You may think that means it's easy to get the rock over to the platform, however there is one catch. By going over to the rock, it's revealed that it is embedded in a frost talus. This is our first of these 3 talus blessings, and I think this is easily the weakest. Now I will say I probably put this up higher than most would because I actually quite enjoy fighting taluses. However, let's not kid ourselves, this shrine is nothing special. This being a frost talus does make it a bit more interesting since they're probably the rarest talus type, but there's a bit more of a problem with it. A frost talus's gimmick is that it will freeze anyone standing on top of it, making the fight much more difficult. However, if you got the Zant helmet from the depths, you can't freeze. That essentially turns this into a normal talus fight, and from there, there's really nothing else to do other than walk a few feet to the platform. Now, I'm aware most people probably won't have this helmet when fighting this guy, but even still, this is a pretty weak blessing due to not having much more than this. 95, the ability to create. We finally made it to the first shrine in the entire game, and I gotta say, it did a pretty good job kicking us off. This is the tutorial for the game's very first ability, Ultra Hand, and lets you work with it in many different ways. First, you simply just need to create a ramp for yourself, and then you need to attach two slabs together to make a larger bridge, or you could do that, I guess. The last puzzle requires us to make a device that can cross this massive ending gap. I think this was a good final puzzle to throw on, as it shows off a more unique use for Ultra Hand, which can get people to start thinking about other ways to use it. But with that, we reach the end. Obviously, this shrine was bound to be very simple since it's the first shrine in the game, but I think despite that, this does a great job showing off how Ultra Hand can be used effectively. I also like it more than the other tutorial shrines we've seen so far, as this one has a bit more room for creative solutions. 94, more than defense. This works as a showcase of how you can fuse certain elements to your shield to give it new abilities. The first room focuses on a flame emitter, which can be able to melt ice. The second room focuses on a stone plate, which can defend against massive blasts of fire. And finally, the third room focuses on a rocket shield and how it can launch you high up into the air. This is a really nice tutorial to have, and I'm also happy that for each shield you have to fight a construct. There's really not much puzzle here though, as the solution for every room is basically the exact same thing, so I have to keep it kind of low. 93, Raru's Blessing, Toki Shrine. Found in Oakley's naval cave, you have to walk the crystal through it to the end. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? Well, you have to make sure to watch for rolling rocks. Several of them will roll past you as you try to bring the crystal to the end. The first room will have rocks come from the side. These are pretty fun to avoid, but just be careful to not accidentally place the crystal into the water, as if it sinks too far down, it'll despawn. That's not the only room you have to go through though, as once you reach the end, you have to go through a skinny hallway where it's impossible to dodge the rocks without stopping them in some way. But once you get through that hallway, you can then finally reach the end. While this is definitely still quite simple, I like the idea behind this one, and it's one of the more unique blessing shrines. 92, Midair Perch. This acts as a showcase for the Hoverstone Zonai device. The first room simply requires Link to use a platform to get to the high ledge. The next room has Link use the Hoverstone to make a bridge and a way to get up to an even higher up ledge. Personally, I just did the classic recall trick. The final room has us use the Hoverstones to not only get a chest, but also move an orb across the gap. Once again, I just used recall here, but there are several ways to go about this as they supply a ton of platforms. This is a pretty solid tutorial shrine for the Hoverstone, though the puzzles aren't really that complicated to push this any higher up on the list. 91, a windy device. This acts as a showcase for the fan device, which is pretty important as it's used all the time throughout the game. There are 3 puzzles you have to solve to reach the end. First, you simply need to use the fan to activate your paraglider, then you need to use the fan to cross a small body of water, and then you need to use the fans to propel an elevator to the end. These are all pretty simple puzzles, but each teach you an important aspect of the item. I do also like the chest here, where you have to attach the fans to this platform so the chest is on the correct side for you to open it. Besides that, everything in this shrine is fairly simple, but that's pretty understandable as this is meant to be a tutorial of sorts. 90, Scoop It Out. This one has a pretty cute concept. What you have to do is first power the wheel using a metal platform and then create a scoop to get an orb to reach the end. Or you could just cheat and attach an orb to the scoop. Yeah, I enjoy the concept here, but the execution is a bit lackluster. Maybe the orb should have been located out of the player's reach so they had to make a scoop, but in the end, I did still like this shrine. The chest here is also pretty cute, being buried underneath a pile of orbs as a sort of hidden reward you could scoop up. Again, I do wish you actually had to scoop it, but as it is, it's fine enough. 89, Forward Force. This shrine acts as a showcase for the big wheels as you need to use them to bring the orb across several different obstacles like lava, water, okay, I just cheesed it in 3 seconds. Yeah, by attaching the orb to the car like this and lifting it up using Ultra Hand, you can simply climb back up the ladder, use recall, and then grab the ball to finish. In my opinion, this is probably the single easiest to cheese shrine in the game. I mean, I had to look up a walkthrough for this shrine just to see what the rest of it actually was, and most of the comments are saying they did the exact same thing as me. While it does have to lose some points for that, the cheese is honestly kind of funny, so I'm not bringing it down as much as I would have if the cheese involved targets and bombs. The reason it's able to make it into the top 100 as well is because aside from the cheese, this is honestly a pretty solid shrine. You get to use the wheels to ride over lava, make a thingy to push past these small walls, and even use the wheels to go through water. Those last two are both really creative uses for the wheels and I think act as good puzzles. If this shrine just made it so the orb couldn't open the door within seconds of starting, I think this might have been able to place much higher. At least you don't get the chest if you decide to cheat, cheese, but that's only really a problem for someone who cares about getting all chests. 88. Well-timed cuts. This shrine's theme is using the ability to cut strings with arrows. It starts out with a simple showcase of this mechanic where you have to cut this box's string to move on. Then you get introduced to this shrine's secondary gimmick on top of the cutting, that being recall. You have to use it on this block so that you can move up to the next section. Then you can either jump straight to the chest, which went poorly for me, so I recommend going to the other side instead, which gives you access to 2 platforms, which can be used to catch the chest. Speaking of catching a chest, the next room of the shrine is locked off by a key, so you have to cut down another chest as well. This time though, you have to use recall on it mid-air, so you have enough time to grab it with Ultra Hand. I like this being the solution here. I did a lot of stuff like this throughout the game, but this was the first time I think it was really the intended solution for a shrine. At least I thought it was. Apparently there's this block here I just didn't notice, but whatever, next room. This time you have to essentially do the exact same thing, but on a giant orb instead of a chest. Honestly, I kind of wish this was something different, because having the exact same solution as the chest in the last room makes this shrine slightly more repetitive. That is the end of the shrine though, and overall I think it was solid. The reason it's not higher is because I feel like the last puzzle could have been something more interesting. Maybe you'd have to try and cut the string as it swings at the perfect time to make the orb land into a holder. I'd still say the length was good here, I just changed the last puzzle. 87. Raru's Blessing Tananude Shrine. This is once again another blessing shrine taking place on a sky island. The platform is on an island separated from the crystal, and you have to travel across them. Luckily there's one of these gravity-defying platforms in a fan nearby, so you can use it to travel to the sky island. Once you get to the crystal island, you have to cut down some vines in order to reach the crystal inside. To deliver it back to the shrine platform, you're given a large amount of zonai parts alongside another gravity-defying platform. This is where a lot of the fun for the shrine comes in, as you have to try and make a unique vehicle to transport the crystal. Overall, this blessing is definitely on the more simple side, but I enjoyed doing it. 86. Raru's Blessing Rakakuja Shrine. This crystal is found in the Gerudo Canyon. The shrine platform is found at the top of the small river that contains a lot of mini waterfalls. What you need to do in order to complete this shrine is take the rock and attach it to the stone and wheels around it. Assuming you put them together correctly, you should now have a 6-wheeled cars that you can use to ride up the little waterfalls. I just found it really fun being able to ride up these almost perfectly straight walls, which yeah, might seem a little dumb, but I'm easily impressed. On your way up to the shrine platform, you can also pick up and drop off a Korok. This isn't technically part of the shrine itself, but I like how the path is shared so you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Once you reach the top, that concludes the shrine. Yes, it is quite short, but I had fun with it. 85. Proving Grounds in reverse. Alright, back to some Proving Ground shrines. This one's gimmick is based on using recall to move around it, but it's used literally once at the start of the shrine, and it's in the most generic way possible, just going up an already moving gear, which is seen in a billion other places. The combat is still fun here, and I like that they tried to have a theme, but they should have executed it a bit better. Also, shoutouts to this construct who killed himself. 84. Proving Grounds Traps. This is kind of similar to the last one where it has a theme, but isn't that expanded on. As the name implies, the shrine is based around traps. There are a few things that Link can cut down to hurt his enemies. These include torches, boulders, and more, but to be honest, I just ended up doing this exactly the same as you would do with any basic Proving Ground shrine. I feel like trying to line up each trap to work would be more effort than it's worth. While I still definitely appreciate the effort to make this one distinct and I nonetheless had fun doing it, I just think there are better Proving Ground shrines later. 83. Proving Grounds The Hunt. This is about using the homing car element to ram into enemies. Unlike other Proving Ground shrines, this is split up into 2 rooms. The first one gives you a simple tutorial by having you attach some spikes to the car to kill the construct. After an epic duel for the ages, the door opens and we have to use the cars to kill the several enemies in the room. There are a lot of constructs in here though, so I died. That made me get real pouty and just make the cars do all the work. This was a very good use of my time. Yeah, so my main problem is that I just don't love the theme for this shrine. The cars take so long to actually do anything, and it's not particularly fun to raid around for them. I know you could beat this without solely relying on the cars, but since they are meant to be the shrine's gimmick, not using them would kinda go against that. This definitely executes its theme better than the last 2 Proving Ground shrines, it's just that I don't really love this theme. 82. Raru's Blessing Genodok Shrine. Once again, another shrine rock taking place on a sky island, this time over South Hyrule. The beam leads to an island that's fairly close by, however there's no way to really reach it. That is, until you notice this strange device on the island with the platform. By using Ultra Hand, you're able to turn this device, which will also affect the landmass in front of you. This lets you create a bridge across to the island with the crystal, but if you notice, there's also a chest connected to this, so make sure not to miss it. Now, despite how obvious the solution here is, I'll admit I'm a bit of an idiot. At first I was just too lazy to move the bridge into place and try to make a plane, which, let's just say, did not go well. Then I got the shrine rock onto the platform and yeah. Eventually though, I was able to complete the super easy solution and finish the shrine. I do kind of like this shrine conceptually, but as I've shown, it is quite simple, so it's gonna be here on the list. 81. Alignment of the Circles. I entered this shrine and had a panic attack. I knew this would be like my personal least favorite shrine from Breath of the Wild just by taking one look at it. In Breath of the Wild, there was a shrine called Fateful Stars, and it was the only shrine I had to look up the solution for in both this game and Breath of the Wild. What you had to do was place orbs into specific holders based on the lines lines on the shrine wall. I hated this puzzle because it felt so stupid, and I know I wasn't alone on that. This was the #1 autofill shrine for Breath of the Wild when you tried to look it up, which certainly made me feel better about not knowing it, but I still hated it. So when I entered the shrine and saw a ton of holders in front of me, I knew exactly what I was in for. But what was the solution this time? Well, instead of needing to look at the walls, to know which holder you're going to need to place the orbs in, you have to look at the ceiling. In every single shrine there are these green rings scattered about, but in this shrine it points to the 4 holders you need to place the orbs inside of. Now this one is kind of hard for me to judge since I'm not really sure how someone who hasn't done the Breath of the Wild shrine would feel about this. Personally though, I do like this a bit better. The hints are more obvious while not giving the solution away at all. The chest here is also really cool, honestly one of my favorites in any shrine. After getting to the end, you're given another orb, and to unlock the chest, you needed to place it in another holder. However, none of them in the main room work. If you look at the area you just got the new orb though, you may notice that one of those green ceiling rings is hovering over a spot in the floor. By using Ultra Hand, you can actually move the floor tile to reveal a hidden holder, which is such a good idea. So while I was prepared to put this low due to my Breath of the Wild trauma, I don't know, maybe I just grew as a person, but I like this version much more than the original. 80. Jump the gaps. As the name implies, this is all about jumping large gaps. Okay, so what you actually have to do is create ramps for balls to roll over so you can move between the rooms. In the first room, you simply have to place the platform in the right way so the ball can roll over it and get some air. The second room has the chest, which is pretty simple as all you have to do is make a pathway across. The puzzle in this room requires making another ramp, but since you don't have an already raised up piece of the floor, you have to make the ramp completely from scratch using the room's 2 platforms, which is pretty fun. Sadly though, once you make the second shot, the shrine ends. The idea is really solid, and I definitely think it's deserving of being further expanded upon. Had this shrine had 1 or 2 more rooms, I think this could have placed much higher, but as it is, it's a slightly underutilized good idea. 79. Mallet Smash. In the first room, you're given a big log and a rocket, which you then have to combine to hit the target. Also, mine broke halfway through, but it still worked, so the next room has the chest, which you could just climb to get, so whatever, but also a new set of materials. Instead of having a sliding block, you have to build your mallet onto a wheel. I think this is a pretty good way to slightly up the difficulty, requiring 2 logs instead of just 1. Sadly though, that's the end of the shrine, so yeah, this one is pretty short. While I like the concept, it definitely needed a bit more. The other problem though is, of course, this is another target shrine. So yeah, this sadly has too many problems for me to put it up any higher. 78. Swing to hit. In this shrine, you have to use metal cubes and balls on chains to hit targets. In the first room, you have to lift up the platform so you can go to the first puzzle. You have to then attach the metal cube to the orb on a chain so that it'll be big enough to hit the target on the other side. The second room gives us the chest and the final target as well. This chest does take a bit more effort to reach than the one in the last shrine though, so I'll give it some bonus points for that. The final target gives us a log alongside the chained orb. Additionally, the orb is on a sliding platform, meaning you have to use the weight of the swing to propel the platform into the target, which is a really creative puzzle. While the log does add a bit of weight, it's much better to attach it onto the sliding block itself to give you extra reach. Once you hit that target though, we once again reach the end of a kind of short shrine. While I definitely like this one's gimmick more than the last entry, both are so short that I think they have to end up next to each other. And of course, on top of that, 77. A sliding device. This shrine is all about the sled Zonai device. Entering into this shrine, we see several sleds going down a sandy hill. They're going pretty quick, so it's impossible to catch them. Why are you trying to? Stop! Stop! To get up this hill, we have to use recall on the sled, so once we finally make it up safely, we get into the main area of the shrine. This is a massive open space where you're given a sled, a few fans, and a controlling stick, which you can of course make into a vehicle to explore the area. Now you can pretty much just go straight to the end from here, but if you decide to take a left, you can go for the chest. Once you do that though, you can fly back over to the main area pretty quickly and reach the end. Yeah, this shrine is pretty quick. I did enjoy it though, as the big open area was nice. I just wish there was a bit more here. 76. Shining in Darkness. As the name implies, this is once again another shrine that takes place in complete darkness. This does luckily give us a light so we can see through the darkness and make our way through the maze. We need to find a key so that we can go through the door and exit the shrine. There's one out in the open, but it only contains a luminous stone. The other 2 chests involve picking up parts of the floor and wall, which I think are pretty good hiding spots. The one inside the floor tile contains the key, which means once again we have to make our way back to the start and escape. Now I do really like the idea behind this shrine, but I feel like it could have been executed a bit better. Only needing to find 1 key makes this take almost no time at all, so if the maze was bigger and we needed to find, say, 3 keys, I think that would have been pretty cool. I also think there should have been some enemies here as well. Still, I did like this shrine, but it could have been greatly improved. 75. Downward Force. This is located on the way up to the Wind Temple, which is very important as this showcases one of that climb's main elements, these trampoline airships. Before we get into them though, you first have to unlock a gate by shooting this switch through the bars. This just teaches you that arrows can be used to hit these switches, which will be important for the end of the course. After getting out of the cage, you then have to fight against a construct before finally reaching the first boat. This teaches you exactly what they do. By jumping on them, you'll get launched up super high into the sky. Once you understand what they do, you then have to go into the obstacle course, which features several moving ships that you have to glide between to reach the end, and the chest hidden off in the corner. Once you reach the end, the shrine comes full circle like I said, where you have to use bullet time to hit this switch to open the exit. This shrine was quite a lot of fun to do in the end. It was honestly a bit tricky to rank, as it wasn't really about puzzle solving or combat, more so platforming. I still like the shrine a lot though. I mean, my favorite gaming franchise is Mario, so of course I'm gonna love platforming. I did still decide to keep this kind of low, but I had a lot of fun with it. 74. Deep Force. This shrine focuses on a pretty unique element, being these zonai balls that float on water. The first room requires you to hit a target using this ball by sinking it into the water and having it fly back up. First off, I just think using this element is kind of fun. The way it bounces on the water is enjoyable to mess around with. Entering into the second room, we're able to find the chest hidden in a really neat spot. It's extremely difficult to see unless you're currently using Ultra Hand, which I think is pretty cool. This room also has a construct, which is a bit random to throw in, but I won't complain because it's something more to do. That brings us to the main puzzle here, which is exactly the same as the first room. Yeah, there's a platform off to the side, but I'm really not sure why. You could just sink the ball to solve the room again. Really not sure what this was about. Luckily, the last room is a pretty fun one. When you enter, you'll see an elevator that's blocked off by a platform, so your goal is to use the balls to knock the platform out of the way and release the elevator. I think that's a pretty cute and fun expansion on the idea. Once you do that, you simply have to use recall to reach the end. This was definitely a fun shrine to actually do, but the second puzzle tanks this one quite a bit. Really not sure why they did that. Also, of course, there are targets here, but it barely saves you any time to use bombs, so I don't really care. Alright, these next three shrines are all pretty much the same conceptually, so I might as well cover them all together. 73, Raru's Blessing, Ikashuk Shrine. 72, Raru's Blessing, Matsusasis Shrine. And 71, Raru's Blessing, Mayatoki Shrine. All three of these are mazes that require Link to try and reach the center by following a trail of pine cones. Straying off from this path will lead you face to face with one of the Gloom Hands. Actually, I don't know if the others besides the snow maze spawn in the Gloom Hands. I strayed off the path once and got jump scared, so I never did it again. First off, I really like the settings. Mazes are just always a lot of fun to go through, and that makes each of these extremely memorable. On top of just the Gloom Hands, the area is also covered in the Gloom Effect, which can create some situations where you have to come up with ways to avoid it. Along with that, there are also several hidden chests in each of these, making the exploration around the maze a ton of fun as well. They really do feel like a journey to go through, which I think is the absolute best thing these blessing shrines can be. There are a few issues I do have which keep them from being higher though, but they're mostly small nitpicks. First off, there being 3 of them does make it a bit less original, but I still had fun regardless. Plus, all 3 of these are technically part of a quest, where after each shrine you can go through more mazes and collect pieces of the Ganondorf armor. That's not really part of the shrine itself though, so I'm going to be ignoring the Sky and Depths mazes. The biggest problem would probably be the fact that you can pretty easily skip over some of these. For example, while doing the maze in the water, I just simply used a nearby flying machine and landed directly next to the shrine room, meaning I basically skipped the entire maze. I sort of wish the maze just had a roof go over it, that way you can't cheese it from the top until after you do the shrine. I definitely did still have some fun with these though, so I can't say they were bad. My favorite was definitely the snow one for a few reasons. First off, it's the only one I did completely without cheese, but also the snow setting worked really well. You have to make sure you stay warm, along with this having hidden items locked behind ice that needs to get melted. The other 2 maze shrines are good as well, I just think the snow one is my favorite personally. 70. Hidden Metal. This shrine is all about using metal to conduct electricity, and it showcases this feature off pretty well. The first room requires us to simply attach one metal orb to another, which then powers the nearby gear. Then once we get up, we have to do the same thing, but the chain is just a bit too short. So to solve this, you have to move one, freeze it with recall, and then attach the second orb while it's frozen. That is a really cool idea for a puzzle, and it's not really seen anywhere else. Sadly though, I did find this to be a bit too finicky. The glue from the Ultra Hand would just randomly break for me, and it felt like I just had to get lucky to get it to stick. On top of that, if you move on to the next room while the glue detaches, it won't have any power, so you have to go back and then reattach it. Again, this is a cool idea, I just wish it was a bit more clear why the glue broke most of the time, but then worked afterwards. That then gives us access to the last room, which is where the shrine gets the hidden part of its name from. Unless there was a hidden piece of metal in the room I just talked about. You know, that would honestly make sense. Anyway, this has only one metal orb, which you have to attach to a rod, but the chain is far too short. What you have to do is find another rod in the room and then attach that to the orb so the electricity can reach. The rod is hidden between the gears, which are used to get the chest, which is a really good hiding spot. Except I could not for the life of me find it. I spent like 5 minutes in this room doing nothing, and then I got tired and eventually just used a metal sword I had to cheese it.
No! No! No!
Being able to cheese by just having a metal weapon is a bit lame, but it's not that big of a deal. That on top of the other section being a bit finicky though, did sort of turn me off from this shrine a bit, but I'd still say the idea was pretty good, even if the execution could have been a bit better. 69. Raru's Blessing Mashapin Shrine. This takes place in the Lake of Tinok Cave, and you have to somehow find a way to bring this crystal across this lava to the shrine. Inside the room with you is also a fire-like lake, which is a pretty enjoyable fight. Once you kill it, you get access to the zonai device it was guarding, being a hydrant. Using this, you'll be able to make platforms on the lava, which can be used to take the shrine rock across the gap. If you don't want to make a ton of platforms though, don't worry, as there's also a fan nearby, so you can essentially create a lava boat. After crossing the gap, you're able to reach the end and collect your reward. I like the decent mix of combat and puzzle solving here. Definitely not the most complicated blessing shrine, but I still liked it. 68. Raru's Blessing Sakuman Bar Shrine. This blessing takes place in the Lost Woods. What we have to do is first talk to a Korok and then follow its instructions by only walking where the blue nightshades are located. If we don't, we'll get lost in the woods, so this is pretty similar to the maze shrines we saw before. There are 3 things that make this stand out though. For one, you can't cheese it, or if you can, it's significantly harder. Secondly, there are several enemies placed on the path. While they are fairly easy to defeat since they're just skeletons are cool, so who cares?
Fall.
The biggest difference though is that instead of the shrine just being at the end, we have to bring a shrine rock to a platform. In order to do that, we have to fight a Talus, making this our second Talus shrine. This one is just a normal Talus, making it the easiest fight of the 3, but the content surrounding this fight boosts this up quite a bit above the Frost Talus blessing. Again, keep in mind that I do quite enjoy fighting Taluses, that helped this in the ranking as well. Once you defeat it, the shrine basically comes to an end, making this a pretty solid blessing. 67. Raru's Blessing Mind Talk Shrine. This shrine takes place inside Deplayan Badlands Cave. What makes this shrine so special is the fact that this is another one shrouded in complete darkness. Now I did mention another blessing shrine in a darkness cave at number 120, so why do I think this one deserves to be so much higher? Well, it comes down to how drastically different these 2 layouts are. That well was pretty much a straight shot to the shrine, but this cave is much more maze-like. As you make your way through, you'll have to fight through several Horriblin camps, which gives a nice bit of combat challenge in this cave. Eventually, after fighting through several waves of enemies, you're able to make it to the end of the cave and enter into the blessing. Exploring the inside of this and going down in several paths was pretty fun, which is why I think this is so much better than some of the other blessing shrines we've seen before. 66. Timely Catches. This shrine is all about timing a button press so that a ball is able to land on a pressure plate. The first room gives us a pretty simple introduction to this idea. In front of us, there's a switch which will temporarily bring the pressure plate into the open. At the right of the shrine, you can get launched up to a higher ledge where you can then make a ball start rolling. So what you have to do is roll the ball down, and as it's about to fall, activate the switch. I'd say this was pretty fun to do, and this is greatly expanded upon in the next room. The idea is pretty much the same. You have to hit a switch and launch upward to start a ball rolling. This time though, the launch sends you just a smidge further. Since the switch is all the way at the floor, you have to fall alongside the ball and try to hit the switch on the way down. Landing on top of the switch as the ball is falling nearby is a ton of fun. I really like the idea behind this one. Sadly, this is where the shrine ends, which makes it a bit shorter than I would have liked, but I still enjoyed my time with it. 65. Long or Wide. This shrine is all about using paddles to knock around different objects. The first room opens up with a simple introduction, requiring the player to simply use the paddle to knock the giant orb into its holder. The next room is pretty similar, though this time you have to add a block to the paddle for some extra weight. The third and final room contains this shrine's big puzzle. You first have to try and find a way to attach a platform to the paddle so that it's long enough to hit the ball. This then unlocks a minecart that you have to use to reach the end of the shrine. Now yes, you could technically just walk across the rails, but honestly that's much harder and barely saves any time, so it's kind of hard to call that real cheese. In order to push the minecart across though, you have to reuse the paddle and platform from the giant orb, but this time attaching the platform so it's wide enough to hit the minecart. I think this reuse was really creative, a pretty solid way to end off this shrine. Sure, this wasn't the most complicated thing in the world, but it was still enjoyable nonetheless. 64. Raru's Blessing Janu Shrine. This takes place within a cave where we have to bring a shrine rock from one end to another. Unfortunately, the cave is just a little flooded, so we have to make some sort of boat to get across. Luckily, there are parts nearby to create said boat. You can do whatever you want, but I fused 2 planks together and added fans and a rocket. Making your way through this river is pretty fun. There are also chests floating inside the river that you can stop and pick up. Once you get to the other side though, you've pretty much finished the shrine. While definitely pretty simple, I did have fun designing a boat. There are a lot of options here and that helped it out. 63. Raru's Blessing Yamazuk Shrine. This takes place in Tarn Point Cave, where Link first meets with Sasan. He talks about how his partner finally swam across the massive body of water. He seems to really like her as he calls her a sweetheart and says that he'd do anything for her, which is why he asks us for help getting across. There's already a boat here, but what you need to do is find a way to push it it forward. I just used a Korok leaf attached to a sword, which is able to create a giant gust of wind. Once you get the boat into the water, you'll notice what's so special about it, as the level will keep rising and lowering. So you have to push the boat through this while avoiding all the obstacles. While it can be somewhat slow as you have to wait for the right water level, I still had a pretty fun time making it through this cave. It's especially satisfying when you manage to gain a lot of speed and breeze over a ton of obstacles at once. There are also a few barrels and chests to collect here as well. Once you reach the end, you're able to reunite Sasan and finally on the other side. Anyway, once you get across, you get access to the shrine and you can complete the quest. Going through the quest with the boat was pretty fun, and I also like how it wasn't just a shrine rock, but instead something that had to do with an NPC. I don't like Sasan at all, but it's cool that NPCs were used, I guess. 62. Wheeled Wonders. This shrine focuses on the big wheels, which are often used for vehicles. This shrine does actually show off a few more ways these could be used though. First off, the starting puzzle actually doesn't have us use wheels at all, instead being met with a bridge that needs to be put together. That makes sense though, because our next puzzle has us use the wheels to create a path across. Seeing the bridge unfold out is super satisfying. I think this was a pretty good one to throw in here. Once we cross the lava gap, we then get to use the wheels in a more generic way, that being to make a vehicle across lava. This is pretty simple, but I think it's important to throw on. Once we get to the other side, we could then use Ascend to get to the last section. Here we have a construct to fight along with access to the chest, which I just used Ascend to get. The final puzzle here gives us a pressure plate along with a ton of small orbs. One isn't enough to push down the pressure plate by itself, but by using a large majority of them, it will have enough weight to activate it. Now you could be lame and just move the balls one by one onto the plate, or you could use the wheels and a scoop at the side to make a machine to push all the balls in at once. I think that was a pretty creative integration for the device, and overall I did enjoy how many unique ways to use this element this shrine showed off. 61. A launching device. This shrine acts as a showcase for the rockets, one of the most important pieces of Zonai tech. The first room starts off with the target practice using the item. Like I've said numerous times, you can cheese this with bombs, but also that doesn't really matter here because why would you waste a bomb when the intended solution takes maybe 5 seconds longer. Launching the rocket into the target is pretty fun too. Honestly, I'm a bit sad they didn't expand upon this more by maybe having a room where the target moves around and you have to time your rocket activation. Anyway, the next room has us use rockets to propel minecarts forward on a rail, which is good since vehicles are often one of the main times you'll want to be using rockets in the game. Once you get to the second floor, you can reach the chest using a rocket shield, which is another great showcase of what the rocket can do. The final actual puzzle has us combine what we learned from the first two, the fact that rockets can go flying and that they can attach to minecarts. Using this knowledge, we can soar across this big gap and reach the end, which is also pretty fun. While pretty easy, I think this did a good job showing off what all the rocket can do, so I like this shrine. 60. A bouncy device. This acts as a showcase for the spring. The first room simply shows us what the spring does, requiring the player to jump on it to reach a higher ledge. I also kind of like how they use a catapult before the spring so that we can sort of compare the two. Once you get up to this new ledge, you're faced with another spring and an empty holder, which you of course need to find an orb for. By looking to your right, you'll be able to see the orb on a platform across a big gap, so you have to use the spring at an angle to launch yourself up and across to the other side. I like that they include the different angles springs can be used in, as it shows the player a new way to use the item. Once you get across that gap, you have to then launch the orb back where you came from by placing them both in a— What are you doing? Okay, once you actually launch yourself in the orb across the gap, you can open the cage with the orb to get another 2 springs. Now, if you thought I was an idiot before, you've seen nothing yet. For some reason, I thought the goal for this shrine was to reach the top of the room where you get these 2 springs. So I, no joke, spent over 6 minutes making random doohickeys to try and get up. Thankfully, I did eventually figure out that there's absolutely nothing up here, and all I needed to do was use the 2 springs to get up the ledge in the main room. Well, once you're able to get this chest, the shrine comes to an end. Despite how much I struggled with that last puzzle, I do once again like it as it can show you how you get launched further if you use multiple springs, which is something that's not very obvious. Overall, a pretty good showcase of the device as they really went out of their way to show how many ways it could be used. 59. A controlling device. Continuing our little Zonai showcase streak, we have a shrine that demonstrates the control stick. The first section starts by giving us a little car that we can use to drive over lava. While we can just use the car to simply get over to the next section, the chest is also hidden here as well. You have to use the car to sneak into a skinny passageway and then pick up an orb using Ultra Hand. You then attach it to the car and drop it off into its holder, which opens up the chest. I really like this one. It's a good use of the vehicle and in turn the control stick, along with just being hidden really well. Once you're done with that though, you have to fight a construct before getting up to the next vehicle, being some planes. They aren't ready to go yet though, as you actually have to attach the control stick yourself by tearing apart a car. Once you get it on though, you have probably my favorite flying section from any shrine. Most of the others are completely empty, but here you actually have to avoid some walls, which is a nice addition and makes sense for a shrine all about precisely controlling your vehicles. When you get past the walls, you're finally able to reach the end. I think this was a pretty great showcase of the control stick device. The only thing holding it back is that vehicles like these are definitely used in a lot of shrines, but I don't think it loses too many points for that because this was still quite fun. 58. The ability to combine. This is what I believe to be easily the best of the 4 tutorial shrines. This acts as our tutorial for the fuse ability, and I think they showed it off extremely well here. The first room requires us to break down a wall that's in our way. We're given a few boulders and a rusty claymore, which we can use to make a hammer. Well, once you learn that you can't break down a rock wall with a flimsy stick, you realize that you have to use the boulders, which gets you to the next room. This has 2 areas. The first has several more rock pillars, and the second teaches us how to use the fuse ability with the bow. I'm really happy they didn't just stick to melee weapons here, as I think this is pretty important to teach as well. For this puzzle, you have to use the fire fruits in the room to burn down the leaves across a massive gap. Fire fruit are also some of the most important items to fuse to arrows throughout the entire game, so showing off them specifically is quite smart. Successfully doing this will get you a key, which can let you move on. Before you do that though, you can find a hidden chest on top of one of the stone pillars here, which lets you use your fused weapon even more. The final room for this shrine is a combat test against a construct. That makes total sense as this ability is all about weapon combos, which is also shown off by the construct as it too will use fuse during the fight. This is also a small thing, but I love that there are leaves on the floor here too, which means you can continue to use that fire fruit from earlier to burn the construct. Once you finally beat it, you're able to finish the shrine. Personally, I think there's absolutely no contest between this and the other tutorials. I feel like this had the best puzzles and it expanded upon its ability the most out of any of them. Even outside of just being a tutorial, this is a pretty strong shrine contender, which is something I can't really say for the other 3. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. Our next 3 shrines are all very similar, as each require us to fight a flux construct and then bring the shrine rock connected to them back to a shrine platform. These are all pretty similar to each other, so keeping them back to back makes the most sense to me. I quite enjoy the flux fights as well. It uses the Ultra Hand ability really creatively, which makes me enjoy these blessings despite them being slightly repetitive. So starting the streak off, 57, Rory's Blessing, Gano Shrine. This specific flux construct is known as the Guardian of the Tabantha Sky Archipelago. Now I should mention that this is a flux construct level 3. I know that enemies can level up with you as you play the game, but I'm not sure if these constructs are affected by that or not. I'm going with the assumption that they are, but if not, you can change the order of this mini flux section by putting the higher level ones on the top. As for this flux specifically, it takes place in freezing temperatures, so you have to make sure and eat something to protect. Okay, wrong food. Well, aside from that, the fight is pretty much the same as all the others. Once you defeat the construct and loot all of its drops, you then have to take the shrine rock back up to the platform. The way you get the shrine rock back up is very simple, as the island with the construct has a flying machine you can use. This is by far the simplest method to transport the stone back, so of these 3, it's the weakest. 56, Raru's Blessing, Mayhem Shrine. This is a fight against the Guardian of the North Hyrule Sky Archipelago. This is pretty much the same as the last fight, just without the temperature change. This is also a Flux Construct level 1, which may or may not be because of my world level. What puts this above the last one is how you have to bring the shrine rock to the platform. Instead of having a flying machine, we have an anti-gravity platform and a lot of rockets. Trying to line up the shot is pretty difficult, so you may have to get creative to close the gap between the platform you're on and the shrine platform. Honestly, I like not having a completely free vehicle, so moving the rock was fun. 55, Raru's Blessing, Kumamian Shrine. The final Flux Construct Blessing is against the Guardian of the Nucluda Sky Archipelago. This fight is the same as the last one, but instead of there being anti-gravity platforms, there's springs. I think these are more fun to use in a fight, so I enjoy this battle the best of the 3. On top of that, getting the rock to the platform is easily my favorite here as well. Instead of a vehicle, you're given a spring attached to a platform, which you have to try and set up and launch the stones across. I quite enjoy launching things, making this my favorite of the 3. Obviously, they're all pretty close together though. 54, Water Makes a Way. This shrine is focused on the water hydrant Zonai device. The first room gives us a pretty simple introduction to it, showing that the water is able to make cobblestone when it comes in contact with lava. Once I finally stopped being an idiot, not understanding that you have to hit the device to turn it on, you can use the cobblestone to create a bridge across the lava to the other side. Pretty much, if you've ever played Skyblock, this is exactly like that. Once you get to the other side, you can go to the right for a chest, which is blocked by lava, but is also elevated upwards, so you not only have to make a cobblestone platform here, but also raise it up with recall. After that, you can go to the other side of this room, which has a rusty claymore and a wall blocking us off. Obviously, what you have to do here is clean the claymore. Okay, just kidding, that does nothing. You have to fuse the claymore with the cobblestone platform to break the wall, which I think is a really unique attribute to show off. You could just use a different hammer-like weapon, but this puzzle's inclusion is still a good one. For the final room here, you have a flowing stream of lava that leads to the end, which we can of course generate some cobblestone on. The only thing is that the flowing water is moving away from the end, so we have to use recall in order to get to the other side. This was a good showcase of the device. Not only did they get a lot of basics, but they showed off some more unique uses for the element as well, which I appreciate. 53, Jailbreak. When you first enter into this shrine, you're faced with a wall and a ton of different sliding blocks, which can be moved using Ultra Hand. Making it up this first wall is honestly a bit tricky. There are several ways you could go about it, but each of them require a good amount of thinking since you can't really climb the sliding blocks. The way I did it was by first adjusting this long sliding block all the way to the right, and then I jumped onto it using the nearby light. After that, I slid the top block above me and then ascended through it. While almost definitely not the main way you're supposed to do this, I like how the solution here isn't that obvious. After that, you have access to the chest, which is just a simple ascent to grab. That brings us to the next little puzzle where you have to find a way to ascend through this pillar. This is much simpler than the previous room though, as you just have to place a platform for yourself. That brings us to the shrine's last room, which is also what gives it its name. You're placed inside of a cage and you have to try and get out. It may take a minute, but if you look hard enough, you'll be able to find a platform, which can be used to create a ceiling to ascend through. This shrine was a really great use of ascend with the strong opening puzzle and the fun thematic ending. Puzzle 2 and the chest are a bit weak, but otherwise, this is a pretty solid shrine. 52. Upward and forward. This shrine is all about using Ultra Hand on platforms. The shrine starts with a ramp suspended in the air, which you need to attach a platform to in order to weigh it down and make it across the gap. From there you can take the platform you just used and attach it to a spinning gear nearby to Okay, when you make the jump, you can get access to the chest, which I think is in a good spot. From there, you can go to main puzzle number 2, where you have to once again weigh down a platform. This time though, it's not quite enough to make it up to the other side, so you have to find a way to get up. There are a few ways to do this, but personally, I used ascend through the platform. I like this second puzzle a lot because of how many ways you could go about solving it. The final puzzle has us once again attaching the two platform types together, but this time they're laying on top of a launcher. That means you have to use the platforms to catapult yourself to the end. Despite how many times I died in this shrine for no reason, I had quite a bit of fun with this one. 51. Building blocks. When entering into this shrine, you're met with 2 block structures. On the left is a fully complete one, whereas the right is missing a few cubes. Luckily, there is a perfect amount of misplaced cubes that can be grabbed with Ultra Hand, so by putting the cubes into the right place, the door will open and we can move on. Before we see the next puzzle though, we have to fight a construct. This is like super random and has nothing to do with the shrine, but it's more content so I can't complain. Getting past it brings us to the shrine's final puzzle with a much more complicated cube shape needing to be built. Before we get to that though, we can grab the chest, which is super simple as you just have to place the blocks to get up to it. It fits with the shrine though, so I won't complain too much. As for reconstructing the cube, you're given 3 different block amalgamations and you have to try and squeeze them into place. Figuring out the right way to do this is fairly fun, so I enjoyed this puzzle. Sadly though, that does bring us to the end of the shrine. A pretty good concept overall, but I feel like it could have been longer. 50. Raru's Blessing, Ukuji Shrine. This shrine takes place on the West Necluda Sky Islands. Unfortunately, the shrine crystal is placed on an entirely different island quite far away from the shrine platform, so you first have to figure out how to reach it. Luckily, there's another island nearby that you can glide to, which contains not only an old map, but several zonai parts. This island is shaped like a launching platform, so you can use the large amount of supplies here to make a plane and reach the island with the crystal. So once you put all of them together, you're able to take off. Okay, once you properly construct a plane, you can soar across the massive gap of sky and eventually reach the island with the crystal. Once you land, you have to cut vines blocking your way and get the crystal inside. When you're ready to bring the crystal back to its platform, you have to make a small adjustment to your plane since the original didn't have any wheels to take off with. Once you have this new plane constructed, you're able to once again fly across the sky, but this time over to the island with the platform. Once you crash land into it, you're finally able to finish up the shrine. I really enjoyed how you had to go across 3 different islands to complete this one. Constructing and flying planes is also just a great time as well. 49. Raru's Blessing, Oogum Shrine. This takes place in Lanayru Road, and I think the setting really helps it out. The shrine platform and rock are placed on opposite sides of a sizable body of water. In order to make it to the other side with the rock, you have to fight off a few Lizalfos and cross the water without drowning. Once you reach that other side, you'll notice that the shrine rock is actually behind this waterfall, which doesn't technically change much gameplay-wise, but it is a cool aesthetic piece. Once you climb up behind the waterfall, you'll enter into the Lanayru Road South Cave. There are a few rocks that need to be destroyed, but once you do that, you're able to reveal the shrine rock along with a few zonai parts. Also, this is unrelated to the shrine, but I like how the rest of this cave is hidden behind these 2 waterfalls. It's pretty unique, and since they put an electric like behind one of them, it can actually be fairly difficult to fight. Once you're done exploring the cave, it's time to bring the shrine rock, along with a few stray pieces of zonai tech, to the front entrance. From there, you're able to build a plane and soar across the body of water you had to swim through before. Once you bring the shrine rock to the platform, you've reached the end of the shrine. If nothing else, I just really like the aesthetic behind this one. Bursting through the waterfall with the plane and discovering the rest of the cave behind the smaller waterfalls was a lot of fun. Sure, it's not the craziest or most difficult blessing, but I enjoyed my time with it. 48. Raru's Blessing, Natak Shrine. Here we have ourselves another shrine rock blessing found in the sky. When starting the quest this time around, we can see the beam that connects the rock and platform goes straight into a massive sphere floating nearby. By using that Sky Island's launcher, we're able to send Link flying over to it, and entering inside of it will reveal the crystal. Alongside that though, there's also a spring and a weird controller. Now if you remember from a few other blessing shrines, this is the same controller that will be able to move around landmasses in the sky. This time around, it's actually able to control the sphere that we're currently inside. We need to use this controller to give us a clear shot from it to the platform, because we're going to be using springs to launch the shrine rock out. Lining up and taking the shot here is pretty fun, and while that does bring us to the end of the shrine, I quite enjoyed this one. It was fairly unique from the other blessing shrines, plus I always love just flying through the air. 47, an upright device. This is a shrine that features a zonai element that I always forget about, that being the stabilizer. The shrine starts with a platform that the player needs to ascend on before the actual shrine begins. There's two stabilizers in front of the player, one with a platform attached. Upon being hit, the stabilizers will either stand up or lay back down. You have to use them to get across the gap, so obviously you have to use recall. Once you've reached the other side, you can see another stabilizer along with an orb holder. The orb is on the other side of this gate, so you have to use the stabilizer to launch yourself over the fence to reach it. Once you reach the side with the orb, it's your turn to make something with the stabilizer, so you have to create a catapult using what you have in the room to get the orb over the fence and into the holder. After the orb finally decides to actually get in the hole, a different fence is opened, giving us access to another platform and cup. While at first it may seem a bit unclear what you have to do with this, you're supposed to attach it to the stabilizer platform and then launch yourself across the gap to the end. Okay, once you actually construct it correctly, you're able to send Link flying and finish up the shrine. I had a lot of fun with this one, and I think it's a pretty good showcase of what the stabilizer can do. A good amount of thinking is required to beat this one, which I always appreciate. 46, a spinning device. Alright, starting right off we get the chest, and I think this was a fun place to put it, just having it race by us at the very start. It's like a little reaction test to see if you're able to swap the Ultra Hand before it goes away. Anyway, this first section just has us running past a few vehicles, making sure not to get run over. After we get past that, we have to make our own vehicles to get up this moving slope. We could also just steal one of the crossing cars, but I personally wanted to build something. That's not to say I did a good job though, I kinda made mine a little lopsided. Once we get over the hill, we have a gate that's locked behind one of these spinning switches. While it is easy to activate, you have to keep activating it if you want to go through the door. So what I did was have the car I made run into the switch to spin it for long enough for me to get through. This is a really creative use for the wheel element, which I appreciate since you would mostly only think it'd be good for building cars. That creative use idea continues with our final and my personal favorite puzzle. We have a platform connected to a rail that leads to the end, but we need to figure out how to push the platform to the other side. Well, luckily for us, there are two wheels in this room, so if we attach them to the platform like this, we're able to move across the gap to the end. I really like this puzzle. They could have easily just made this a shrine about cars, but they didn't, and I like that a lot. Definitely one of the better device showcase shrines. 45, Unlit Blessing. This blessing shrine is located on the South Lomé Castle, or in other words, the sky maze over the Gerudo Highlands. Getting to it isn't terribly difficult, just requiring you to fly over with a plane. So why is this blessing shrine so high up on the list? Yeah, so this shrine is a really cute idea. It's meant to bait you into thinking it's a blessing shrine before it just transforms in your face. Once it transforms, all you need to do is shoot the torches on the other side with fire fruit and launch yourself up to the end, but the idea is good enough to bring the shrine up quite a bit. I will say though, I think the execution of the idea could have been a bit better. For starters, this shrine is named Unlit Blessing instead of just Raru's Blessing like all the others. I mean, you didn't hear me have a stroke trying to pronounce this one's name, so that's clearly a sign of something. That alone clues you in that this will be different, but they also drop more clues by having fire fruit all over the place and even a few arrows lying on the floor. In my opinion, all of that makes the jump scare of the shrine transforming far less effective. That's like playing Five Nights at Freddy's and before you get killed, giant text comes on screen saying you're about to get jump scared. I think the arrows and fire fruit should have only appeared after the shrine transformed, because as it is, it's a bit obvious that something is gonna happen here. I still like the shrine, I just think it should have been done a bit better. 44, Raru's Blessing, Josuyu's Shrine. Yeah, you see how much more effective that jump scare was because you didn't see it coming? Once again, we have a Sky Island Shrine Rock, this time taking place over West Necluda. The shrine beam leads to an island directly across from the one with the platform, but there's no direct way to get between both islands. Luckily for us though, there's a device we saw earlier in this list to help us get across. If we grab it with Ultra Hand, we're able to move a chunk of land in front of us. There's just one problem. The island with the shrine rock is straight across, but the land we have to control is curved. The other shrine we could simply just make a bridge across, but this time we need to think a bit harder, which is what puts this one up so much higher. There are many ways you could go about this, so here's what I did. First I connected the shrine rock island to the third island in the middle, but then I connected the platform island with that third island. From there I stood on the curved piece of land and was able to use recall to reach the shrine. Now sadly I didn't have enough foresight to set the recall path to let me get back, so I had to find a different way. Luckily by climbing around the third island and using Ultra Hand to carry the rock, you're able to throw it far enough to actually reach the shrine platform. So yeah, despite this and a previous blessing shrine having very similar themes, I think this one is much better as it takes a lot more thinking to actually complete. You can't just simply build a bridge, which I like a lot more. 43, Flotational Brilliance. This shrine is another to focus on the floating zonai balls, and I think this does a much better job than the one we saw earlier. We start the shrine off with a platform attached to a string along with a floating ball. We need to reach the other side of this small bit of water, but can't by simply swimming. What we have to do is cut the string and then attach the floating ball to it so the platform goes high enough and we can cross the gap. Already, this is a much more in-depth puzzle than what we saw before. The next puzzle also requires us to cross a gap of water, but this time we have a different platform. Attaching the floating ball to it will send the platform flying. So you have to launch yourself in just the right way to end up on the other side, which was once again a pretty fun puzzle. To end us off, we have another gap of water. You could probably cross this without making anything, but there's a pressure plate at the other end this time, so you need to move something heavy over there. Like your mom. Before we get into that though, we can get the chest, which is just hanging over the water attached to the string. Honestly, I like the chest in the Deep Force shrine better as it was more hidden. Now to get over to the other side, you have a fan, 2 floating balls, and a heavy platform. The platform will sink if you try to put it in water, but it's needed to activate the pressure plate on the other side. So you have to use the floating balls to, okay, I don't know what I was trying to do there, but you have to attach the balls and a fan to push the creation across the gap. And with that, the shrine is complete. I think they did a really great job with this one. It was a lot of fun using this device. 42. The Ice Guides You. Once again, this is another blessing shrine that takes place on a sky island. Wait, now hold on, I didn't say this was a blessing. What's going on here? Well, this is one of the very few shrines that not only requires you to get a shrine rock, but also complete a challenge inside. So starting off with the shrine rock portion, Link has to follow a beam which is pointing to an island fairly far away from the shrine platform. Luckily, hidden on the island Link is on, there's a platform with fans attached, which Link can use to fly upwards. Once Link arrives, he has to cut some vines to reach the shrine rock inside. Also, the Korok is quite fun on this island. I like having to shoot the balloon from the stump. When you finally finish doing that, along with collecting the old map, you have to use the Zonai tech inside the shrine to build a plane and travel across the sky. Now, I know we've seen this a few times by now, but I do honestly enjoy doing it, so I don't think it's going to lose any points for it. Once you get the shrine rock back to the platform, we can begin part 2 of the shrine, the interior. When you get inside, you're met with a small body of water along with ice root and frost emitters. You have to use them to create an ice platform to slide down this slope to, oh, it's a target. Bomb? Yeah, this is another shrine that loses points for the bomb thing, which sucks because the idea here is genuinely really cool. After that, we reach the end of the shrine, which may seem short, but remember, we did also have the crystal quest for this as well. You don't have to end it right away though, as there's actually a second challenge off to the right for the chest. Bomb? Yeah, so I'm sure you all could tell, this shrine is definitely held back by the bomb arrow cheese. I honestly think if they didn't implement that, this had potential to be one of the top 20 or so shrines, and if the second puzzle was required, it may have even been top 10. Sadly though, this is what we got, and while still definitely good, I think it could have been better. Despite all my negative comments though, this did have to place somewhat high. I mean, it's essentially 2 shrines in one, so there is still a solid amount of content here. 41. Proving Grounds Infiltration. The setting for this one is pretty neat, as we have to try and infiltrate a small building being run by the constructs. Also, it's a small detail, but I like the siren that goes off when we activate the constructs here. It really helps sell that theme. My opinion on this one though is also likely influenced a lot by when I actually did this, because I found this one fairly difficult at the time. On top of the constructs having some pretty strong weapons, there are also a few traps laid around here for you, making this Proving Grounds pretty fun to run through. 40. Proving Grounds Lure. Speaking of traps, that's what this Proving Grounds is all about, is you have to try and lure the constructs into their own. What I like most about the traps here is that they're actually easy to activate, as all you have to do is go into one of the red lines. The constructs here I also found to be a bit more difficult than they normally are. Regardless though, this was a fun Proving Grounds to run through. 39. Proving Grounds Rotation. As the name implies, this shrine's gimmick is all about spinning. We first get shown that with a massive spinning gear in the center of the room, which we can use to travel to the different constructs. On top of that, there's also different layers to this shrine. Falling down to the lower level can let you find a few better pieces of gear, but you have to sneak around other rotation-based obstacles, this time being a flame emitter that'll track Link's movements. It can be a bit tight to get around, but getting better weapons is definitely worth it. To get on the upper floor, you can use either a spinning gear or a spring. On this upper floor, you have to fight a few more constructs while avoiding more spinning obstacles. I think this executed its theme very nicely, so I like this Proving Grounds. 38. Proving Grounds Vehicles. This Proving Grounds theme is pretty clear just by the name, as you have to use vehicles to defeat all the constructs in the room. Technically, you could use weapons, but I somehow didn't see them despite them being in the exact same spot in every single one of these shrines, so we get to run over the constructs. Yay! Now, there are a lot of different things you can use to make deadly vehicles, like spikes, flame emitters, and even planes, but just running over them is a lot more fun. This is probably the easiest Proving Grounds, maybe even more than the beginner one, since the enemies have a really hard time actually hitting you once you're on a vehicle. This shrine is just so much fun to do though that I have a really hard time caring about that. Using the plane, you can even go into the center and get a bigger vehicle that you can deck out with a ton of Zonai parts, which is pretty cool. Overall, this is definitely one of the best Proving Grounds. 37. Roru's Blessing, Utoja's Shrine. This shrine takes place at the bottom of a cave where we run into a massive ring and platform. It's a bit unclear what we have to do, but it is at least obvious that there's a puzzle here, seeing as the ring will light up when you stand on the platform. Trying to simply shoot an arrow through the ring won't work, so we have to look around the cave for a different solution. After exploring around and fighting some like, Keese, and the Bubble Frog, we eventually stop back at a little camp nearby the platform. This camp has a few resources for us, 2 barrels and 2 Zonai spears. At first I thought maybe the barrels would keep the platform activated and we could walk through the ring, but it seems like the ring only activates when Link is standing on top of it. That leads to the only other thing at this camp being the spears, so maybe if I throw them through the ring, it'll spawn something in. Okay, spears don't fly very far, but luckily for us, the Keese we just fought in the cave actually act as a bit of a hint here. See, one of their drops, Keese wings, will let things fly farther when fused together, so maybe if we fuse the spear and the Keese wing, we can throw it far enough. So with the new fuse creation, you once again try throwing it, and it actually works, spawning in the Blessing Shrine. I really like this cute little puzzle. Slowly piecing together what I was supposed to do was a ton of fun. Yes, compared to some other shrines around it, this is pretty short, but I think figuring out the puzzle here more than makes up for the fact that the solution itself can be quite quick. However, this shrine does have a major problem that genuinely really hurts me. I would have put this so much higher had it not been for this journal. At the camp with the spears, there's a journal we can read that essentially just tells us the solution. Like, I hesitate to even call it a hint at this rate, it's basically one-to-one instructions. Luckily for me, I think reading is for nerds, so I didn't look at the book until after I figured it out. But just knowing the solution is here for free takes a lot out of this one. Personally, I don't think this shrine needed a hint at all, because I had much more fun solving it without knowing. At the very least, the hint should have been more vague, because this is just so obvious. Still, I did like my time with this shrine, so I can't bring myself to move it down too low, but yeah, this notebook knocked it down a good few spots. 36. Alignment. This shrine is just one major obstacle between you and the goal, that being the spinning tower. Right out of the gate, you may try ascending through it, and while that does bring you up a little bit, it's not nearly enough to get to the top. Since you can't climb on this tower either, you have to find some other way through it. That's where the shrine's name comes into play, alignment. You'll notice the tower is segmented into 3 separate parts, and while you can't control them with Ultra Hand, you can use Recall to reposition the segments. By lining up all the segments correctly, you can first get the chest, which is hidden in a pretty good spot on the tower, and then reach the end. Ascending through the tower once you get it set up correctly is really satisfying, especially since you actually get to see Link ascend through it rather than getting the standard ascent cutscene. While this is a super short shrine, I really like the concept here and thought it was fairly well executed. Making it longer would probably just make it more tedious too, so I don't hate the length of this. 35. Proving Ground Smash. No, sadly this is not based on Smash Bros. Sorry Link mains, you can't spam Nair here. This being a Proving Ground shrine already makes it quite fun, but what I really like about this is the fact that you can actually go about completing it in a number of different ways. The main way is of course by smashing the pillars the constructs are on top of, which is of course where the shrine gets its name from. However, you don't have to do that, as this shrine also lets you ascend through the platforms as well. But the ones in the middle are surrounded by water, so how are we supposed to reach them? Well, around this area are a ton of ice fruit. With a little bit of experimentation, you can discover that by throwing ice fruit at the water, you can create a small ice platform, which would allow you to reach the central constructs. I just think this Proving Ground shrine was incredibly well designed, making it one of my favorites. 34. Proving Grounds Lights Out. This is a pretty interesting shrine, as it's again one of the very few to have a quest both outside and inside the shrine. So let's start with the outside first. This is our third and final shrine that comes from the diving minigame. In case you need a refresher, the first one led into a combat training shrine and the other one was just a blessing. So since this has much more worthwhile content inside, it makes sense that it's the highest. Unfortunately, that does come with the trade-off of this having the most simple diving minigame of the 3, as there are no obstacles you need to avoid while going through the rings. Despite that though, I still liked this minigame. The skydiving mechanics are a lot of fun. Once we complete that though, we finally gain access to the inside of the shrine. When we get in there, the theme of the shrine is very apparent. It's dark. You do, however, get a flashlight you can use in the form of shields with lights fused on, which is a nice touch. When you enter the shrine, you'll face off against a big construct that's surrounded by rubies. You'll see it use these rubies to shoot out fire, which teaches you that you can do the same thing. I'm happy this shrine let me use rubies as weapons here, as I generally didn't want to use my gems for weapons at all in the main world. I just didn't want to waste so much rupees, but since materials from Proving Grounds can't be taken outside anyway, there was no worries here. It being fire-based attacks also worked well with the darkness theme, as you're able to produce a bit more light. If I were to say a downside though, I really wish there were more constructs. There only being 3 here makes this one of the shortest Proving Grounds. If they went that extra mile and made the interior have more to it, I'd like this a lot more. 33. Raru's Blessing Joshi Ahiga Shrine. Once again, it's another based on a shrine rock, but the way you have to get it is pretty unique. In Terrytown, you'll meet this NPC named Haggy who's taken the shrine rock for himself. Thing is, he understandably doesn't really know what it is, so he tries to sell it to you. At first he tries to sell it for a large 100 rupees, which I guess would probably be worth the price, but he doesn't know that. So by continuously turning down his offer, you can eventually get him to sell it for only 50 rupees instead. Okay, more like he gets yelled at by his wife, but oh well, too bad, so sad, we get the shrine rock now. Once we have the rock, we then have to figure out a way to get it to the shrine platform. Now the shrine platform is actually placed quite a long distance away, all the way across this large body of water. So to get to the shrine platform, you have to find a way to make some sort of boat, but unlike many other vehicle-based blessing shrines, there aren't really any obvious things lying around for you to use. I honestly like that a lot, as it makes you have to scavenge around Terrytown for whatever resources you can get. I ended up using a schematic I got from a Yiga clan base a little while before, mostly because I just wanted to test it out. Sadly, by this point in the game, I didn't know where the battery upgrade was. This was a long trip. Still, I had fun moving the rock over, plus it was cool to get fish with this machine. Eventually, once you reach the other side of the water, you can enter into the blessing. Overall, I like this much more than most other vehicle-based blessing shrines because it had a unique bargaining system to get the rock in the first place, and there wasn't an obvious vehicle to build. 32. Raru's Blessing, Momosik Shrine. This blessing shrine takes place inside a cave at Death Mountain, which already makes it fairly interesting as you have to deal with the extremely hot temperatures inside. I usually just wore the Flamebreaker armor, but that came with the downside of having less defense, making the enemies inside a bit more deadly. Inside the cave, you're given a minecart track that goes over lava, so you have to build a minecart using the materials nearby. Once you ride along the track, you'll eventually reach the other side of the cave, which has a shrine rock. This isn't just a free grab though, as you then have to fight against an Igneo Talus, which I think is the most difficult type of the three. That difficulty is also boosted by the hot temperatures I mentioned before. Now yes, you could use Flame Guard, but you're still gonna have some trouble with your weapons. Standing on top of the Igneo Talus will also cause Link to constantly take damage, making the normal spin technique much harder to perform. All of this leads to a significantly more interesting fight than the other two Taluses we've seen. Once you finally manage to take it out, you then have to bring the Shrine Rock back outside the cave, which you can do by attaching it to the minecart. Once you do that, you have to walk the Shrine Rock over to the platform. Okay, honestly, they could have placed the platform a bit closer. There was no reason for it to be this far away. Regardless, that brings us to the end of the shrine, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think it was a much better version than the other two Talus fights. The environment alone made it more interesting, but add on this being an Igneo Talus, and we have easily the best of the three. 31. The Stakes Guide You. As the name implies, this shrine is all about the stake element, which I think is one of the most unique Zonai devices. Entering into the shrine, we don't have very far that we can go. We see that we have to get up on this high ledge, but how we do that isn't very clear. Luckily, we have two platforms, one attached to a stake to help us. Additionally, there's also a moving pillar, which has a stake inside of it to show what the stake can do. So by using that context clue, we can pin this platform onto the moving pillar and get up to the next section. Depending on how high we place it, we may even be able to get this shrine's chest, which I think is a decent extra use for the stake. This was a good first puzzle for the element to get us introduced. That then brings us over to the shrine's main puzzle, this rolling orb segment. We have to get the orb to the end of the obstacle course, but unfortunately it keeps rolling off like an idiot. However, pinned to the wall are a few stakes that we can use to maneuver the ball around. First, we have to stop the ball from flying off by putting a stake in its way. Then we have to stop the spinning platform from moving. And finally, we need to use the third stake to boost the ball into the holder. This was a pretty creative use for the device, and I liked it quite a bit. Once the ball goes into the holder, we are then free to exit the shrine. Overall, a very good showcase of this item, and the puzzles were pretty solid too. 30. Fire and Ice. This shrine is all about mixing fire and ice together with some pretty solid puzzles. The room begins with a pressure plate to the left, an ice cube, and some fire emitters to the right. The ice cube is a bit too big to activate the pressure plate, so you have to use the fire to melt the ice and make it smaller, introducing us to the shrine's main gimmick. Once we get the ice cube small enough, we can open up the second room. The first thing we see here is the chest, where we have to use our ice block from before and ascend through it, which I think is pretty creative. That brings us back to the shrine's main puzzle though, where we have to fly across this gap and we get access to another ice cube and a platform. Sadly, the ice gets melted as soon as it spawns, so we have to use the platform to block off the fire emitters. Then we can slide the ice cube back down where we came from by sliding it over these spikes. Once you get the ice block over the gap, okay, now what? At first I had a bit of trouble figuring out what I was supposed to do from here, but I actually like that as I think that can be a sign for a good puzzle. If you notice, the fire emitters from the first room are actually concealing another pressure plate, so we have to find a way to activate it to exit the shrine. Problem is, the ice cube will obviously melt. But if we remember from before, we were able to block off the fire emitters using a stone platform. So what we actually have to do is slide the ice cube and the stone platform across. Dude, what are you doing? Just slide them. Once you get them both across, you can activate the pressure plate and escape the shrine. Once you actually place the platform on the ice cube so it won't melt, then you can exit the shrine. I just really like the central puzzle for this one. It required a lot of thinking and was overall a joy to complete. I will say backtracking can be a bit annoying here, but really this one is pretty good. 29. Proving Grounds, Low Gravity. Before we get into the shrine itself, I want to mention actually getting inside of it in the first place. I don't normally do this, so it's not counting that much towards its placement, but in order to get inside, you have to climb up to the top of the Sky Island and fall down through a laser pit. Dodging the lasers and the climb up were a lot of fun, so I thought I'd mention it. Anyway, as the name implies, this uses the low gravity mechanic in order to create an interesting environment for the shrine. First off, I'm already a fan of the low gravity gimmick. I think it was a lot of fun to mess around with in the game. Secondly, they really did a good job setting this arena up to take full advantage of the concept. All of the constructs are placed above ground level, so in order to reach them, you have to launch yourself upwards. That brings you to the first construct, which after you defeat, gives you you access to rockets. While there are a few moving platforms so you don't have to use the rockets, fusing them to your shield to fly upwards here is fantastic. Once you get to those upper levels, you have to fight and parkour between several constructs, which I just found to be a blast. I'm sure this is probably on the controversial side of my takes, especially compared to some of the other Proving Ground shrines I put below this, but I just found this one to be extremely well designed and a lot of fun. 28. Against the Flow. This shrine focuses on the hydrant device, which we actually saw another shrine focus on a bit earlier, that being Water Makes a Way. While I definitely think that one worked well as an introduction, I think this one is a bit more interesting as it ramps up the difficulty a bit. The first thing we encounter is a big flowing lava river with seemingly no way across. That is, until we notice a hydrant creating some cobblestone for us. Parkouring was pretty fun here, so I like this introduction. Once we get across, we then have to fight a construct which is guarding an orb holder. After defeating the construct, we can see that the orb is placed across some more flowing lava, but instead of simply being on the other side, we have to do what the shrine says and go against the flow. That of course means we have to use recall to get across, which is a good implementation of the ability. In fact, if we decide to go even further, we can get the check. This is a solid enough spot for it. Once we get it, we then have to catch a ride back to the holder with orb in hand. That then unlocks the next room, which is the final and biggest challenge. We see a massive flowing pool of lava with no obvious way across. By looking to our right, we're able to find a fan, which we can ride up to find 2 more hydrants. So we have to figure out a way to get across by just using these resources. Since we saw that water can create cobblestone, we use that to create a platform and attach the fans to it so that we can make our way across. I messed up the cobblestone generator. Alright, well that would have been the end of the shrine, but now we get to see how I fumbled this hard. So after I died, the resources did not spawn back with me. If you notice, they actually kept moving. That's pretty unfortunate since now I have no way to get across. Except I'm a genius. See, for absolutely no reason, I attached my hydrant to my watercraft, which means that it's constantly creating cobblestone, and since this is flowing lava, the cobblestone was able to make a path. While that would have been an easy way for me to get across, my craft crashed into the side like a stupid dumb idiot. So now that I have my machine back, I need to find a way to turn it. While I struggled for quite a while since there was no control stick, I eventually figured out I could gradually turn it by adding more cobblestone to one side. So, after attaching 3 new pieces, my craft was finally free to make it to the end. That was honestly one of the most fun moments for me in any shrine, which helped it in the ranking for me, despite most people probably not having to go through that. That's why I think personal experience is so important for this ranking, because the way you solve the shrine will greatly influence how much you liked it. Aside from my shenanigans though, this was a pretty solid shrine on its own, so I'm happy to say I was a fan of it. 27. Built to Carry. This is another shrine all about taking a big orb back to the entrance. When we enter, we can see there's a massive holder that activates the exit, so it's our job to find the orb to go with it. In order to get the orb, we can glide across this gap and climb up a few ladders. Now that we have the orb, we have to find a way to bring it back. The gap is a bit too far to get the orb across though, so we have to go around. We can simply start by sliding the orb down these rails since they're pretty small. When we get to the next side though, the rails are a bit too big for the orb to just slide on its own, which is where the shrine's name comes in, as we have to build something to get it across. Luckily we have 2 sticks, which we can attach to the orb like this and get it to slide down. Our final rail though is really where we have to start thinking. Before getting to that, we can also grab the chest here, which is in a pretty good spot. You have to make your way across these rails to reach it. I personally use the nearby platforms to create a flat surface. Then I put it on the rails so I could climb across them and use it to reach the ladder. I think this chest works pretty well with the shrine's theme, so no complaints from me. As for the actual final puzzle though, we have to get the orb across this final gap, but we only have one side of a rail line instead of 2. Luckily though, we have quite a few platforms to work with here. Personally, I created a box with one side missing, as it let the orb hook onto the rail. I really like this final puzzle as it requires a decent amount of creativity to solve. Once we get to the end though, we can put the orb back in its holder and exit the shrine. Overall, this was just very solid. I really don't have anything negative to say on it. 26. Building with logs. This was the very first shrine I did outside of the Great Sky Island, and you can definitely tell by how much I failed. Anyway, as the name implies, this shrine is all about using logs to reach the end. When we first enter, we'll see a wall that's just a bit too tall for Link to get over. Link also can't climb on these walls, but he can climb on logs, and luckily there's one right next to us. By using Ultra Hand, we can put it in place and get over the first obstacle. Obstacle 2 though is much trickier. We have to get across these 2 slanted platforms to continue on with the shrine. Sadly, since these aren't Minecraft logs, they'll roll off if we try to place them down here, so how do we get across? Well, if you're smart, you can just attach the 2 logs you have together, making it so it can't roll down the sides. But, if you're like me, this is the moment where the game changed for you forever. See, I'm just a bit too stupid to figure out the intended method here, but luckily for me, there are plenty of unintended ways to beat shrines. You've seen me do this a couple times this video, but this is really where I learned the true capabilities of recall. I learned that if I hold up the log in the air and then recall it, I could climb on the log to get across the gap, eventually.
Fortnite Battle Pass.
Yippee!
I know it's not the intended solution, but I'm really happy I learned this here, as I think it greatly enhanced my playthrough for the better. Not all cheese is bad, because stuff like this is pretty fun to perform. Bombs on target cheese is stupid, but this requires actual creativity, and I like this shrine a lot more for it. After that, I think the shrine gets a bit easier, with a simple flat gap that we can cross by attaching 2 logs together. Another gap follows that though, with the opposite side being placed higher up than the side you're on. Luckily, you can just make a ramp to get to it, or if you're awesome like me, you can continue to use recall. That brings us to the shrine's final puzzle. This time we have a ton more logs, but the gap is so much larger that we can't just construct a comically large bridge to get across. Lucky for us, alongside the logs we have a few fans, so if we attach the fans and the logs together, we can make a little boat. This lets us not only get the chest, which I think is in a good spot, but also the ending of the shrine. I think this was not only a good shrine to put early game, but also just a good shrine in general. It expands upon its theme well and is a really good length. And of course, it gets bonus points for me for changing the entire way I played this game. 25. Courage to Pluck. Everyone knows and loves this shrine for good reason, as it seems to be based off the game Jenga. Just like the real life game, if you topple the tower over, you lose. Now in order to beat this shrine, you need to get the giant orb on the top of the tower into the holder. The problem is, the orb is just a bit too far away for Link to reach, so you have to activate a moving platform to get it. To activate the platform, you need to take out 2 pieces from the tower and attach them to this bit of electricity. Now yeah, you could easily cheat by placing down a few metal weapons, but who cares, where's the fun in that? Once you get the orb, the shrine is basically over with the exception of the 2 chests. One of them is super easy, just requiring a well-placed Jenga piece. The other one though, I didn't see in my playthrough. It can be quite difficult to actually grab the chest, and I think hiding it in the Jenga tower was a cool spot. But with that said, that's basically the end of this shrine. Now yes, like I said, I love the concept here, and it was really cool seeing it the first time. It is really short though, so I find it hard to justify placing it too highly. I still clearly like it, which is what got it this far, but I just don't think it's a top tier shrine. 24. Courage to Jump. Entering into the shrine, we can immediately discover that it's in the low gravity mode. This will of course be changing the shrine's titular jumping physics, but if you think we're going to be jumping around like Super Mario, you're sorely mistaken. Instead, when we go into the shrine a bit further, we are given a few cars to drive. In front of us is an obstacle course, and we have to drive our car through it as best as we can without dying. It starts simple enough with us having to go off a ramp into lava, but starts getting a little bit more complicated as we go on. The platforms we drive on start to be a bit more slanted, making movement much more difficult. Additionally, there are also a few constructs here trying to shoot us. Yeah, so since they were successful, I had to walk along the rest of the course, which was kinda sad, but eventually you make it to another vehicle. This is where the name really comes into play, as you have a ramp facing a big gap, so you have to have courage to jump. Luckily to help us, there are some rockets nearby to attach to the car. So once you do that, you can leap across and reach the end. This shrine's concept was really fantastic. I enjoyed going through it a lot, even if I lost my car about halfway through. Honestly, I wish if you lost your car you just failed on the spot, but this was still a pretty fun shrine to drive through. 23. A Precise Strike. When entering into the shrine, you have a giant orb in front of you. You need to somehow get it across this massive gap. Luckily, there's a big swinging object attached to the roof and a metal cube. By using Ultra Hand, we can essentially play golf here, and it's pretty fun to send the ball flying. Right next to this first room, there's also a hidden room, which is where we get the chest. This one is pretty different though, as the hole will actually move, so you have to try and time your swing properly. It can be somewhat tricky to hit. Not only do you have to time it, but you also have to make sure to not swing too hard or too soft. This took me quite a few tries, but finally getting it was so satisfying. This is easily one of the best chests in any shrine. It expands upon the shrine's theme perfectly, and I love that. Sadly though, that's all this shrine has to offer. Yeah, you're only required to make 1 shot, which makes this a bit underwhelming. This should have had something closer to 3 shots plus the one for the chest, at least in my opinion. The concept is still really good, they just didn't expand on it as much as they could have. 22. A Fixed Device. This shrine took me way too long to figure out what I was supposed to do. It was only one main room, but that room is filled with quite a lot of objects that you have to figure out how they work together. Primarily, you'll see a giant orb, a few stakes, a few small sticks, and a few switches. Right off the gate, you can hit this switch to reveal, oh. Yeah, so this shrine can be cheesed with bomb arrows, which really sucks because I love the idea behind this one a lot. It will of course be losing points for that, but I'm going to keep it relatively high because I still had a lot of fun with it. Well, back to the intended way to do this shrine, it's clear that we have to somehow find a way to knock the giant orb into the target. This is where the stake comes in, as we can see the ball interact with it while it rolls, so maybe we can use the stake to hit the ball into the target. Only problem is, how do we do that? I took ages trying to figure out what on earth I was supposed to do with the stake. I figured I likely had to put it into this thing next to it, but I just didn't know how to get it to work. The beginning of the shrine also acts as a good hint for this solution, as to get to the main area we have to take a spinning platform, which is attached to a stake and a similar looking object. That is a really good hint that's not too obvious. I was just too stupid to figure out what to do with it. That was until I finally figured out that this thing is actually a switch and not just a weird light. From there, the shrine turns into a little baseball minigame of sorts where you have to try and knock the ball into the target as it's rolling towards you. This can be somewhat difficult to time climb properly, but once you do it, you've successfully beaten the shrine. However, that's not the end for us just yet. We can see over to the right that there's a weird platform with another stake. While it wasn't clear why it was there when we first started, after hitting the target, it's revealed that another target has appeared. This is what leads us to the chest, so now we have to find a way to hit it. Our first obstacle is of course the big platform blocking our way. We have to now use our knowledge of the stake to both move and hold the platform in place. This is a really good expansion on the stake element, and it makes the shrine have so much more to it. On top of that, the baseball swing itself has also changed a bit as you have to swing much later. Overall, this might be my favorite chest in any shrine. It adds so much more content that perfectly expands on the shrine's theme. I really liked this puzzle and minigame overall. It's a super memorable shrine to me, and if it didn't have the target cheese, this might have even been able to reach the top 10.
Yeah, if I haven't made it clear by now, I really wish they didn't implement target cheese.
21. A reflective device. This shrine of course focuses on the mirror device, which is an element we haven't seen yet in this video, but it's actually one of my favorites. It's not helpful in the open world, but I feel like it has some of the best puzzles in the game inside and outside of shrines. The first room gives us an introduction to what the item can do, as there is a massive beam of light and a place on the wall that you need to shine the light into. I was very excited when I saw this shrine for the first time, as it finally gave me an excuse to try out the mirror shield I made from some random mirror I found in the overworld. He will never be him. I think that first room is a much needed tutorial, as it may not be perfectly clear what mirrors can do for you. Room 2 is really where the shrine picks up. You can see another light in the room across from you, but there's no way for you to reach it. Luckily, there is a small hole in the wall, so by using Ultra Hand, you can pick up and move the mirror through it and control it from the other side. I think this was a pretty cool use of the item. Entering into room 3, we can see two things we need light to hit, but no large beam of light in sight. That's where we have to use our brains a little and continue the light from room 2 into room 3. I like that connection idea a lot. It works out pretty well here. Setting up the mirror to hit the first light detector is fun too, since you need to turn it with Ultra Hand. Once that activates, the light detector becomes an elevator and you can use it to reach the second floor. While you could move on from room 3 at that point, you also have the chance to get this room's chest. The second light detector is what opens the door, but actually getting it to activate is easier said than done. On the second floor, you don't have any light yet, so what you need to do is go back down where you just were and set up the mirror you used for the last puzzle to reflect the light straight upwards instead. Then, with careful positioning, you can use this floor's mirrors and Ultra Hand to reflect that light right into the detector. I really like this chest. It requires a good bit of thinking, and I always love it when a chest uses the shrine's gimmick in a fun way. After getting the chest, we're able to reach the shrine's final puzzle. We have two mirrors to get this beam of light into the ending detector. Problem is, there's a big wall in our way, so we have to set up the mirrors to go around it. This isn't terribly hard to do, but I think it was a solid way to end this off. This might just be me liking the mirror element, but I quite enjoyed this. The chest is really great, and this shrine is a pretty perfect length as well, as there's a good amount of puzzles here. Definitely one of the best Zonai showcase shrines. 20. A route for a ball. This shrine is all about getting a large orb into its holder. We've seen this a few times, but sadly there's no vehicle cheese this time, so we actually have to go through with the puzzles. By running past the holder, we can see a massive gust of wind, which will bring us across to the main puzzle. When we get there, we see several notable things like this chest and areas off to the left and right. Sadly, the chest and the right path seem impossible to reach, so we have to go left. By using Ascend, we can get ourselves a giant metal orb, which sadly won't work with the holder, but is still useful for the shrine. By using it, we can get to the chest, which is solid enough I guess. Jumping on the ball is pretty fun. We then have to try and figure out how we can use the giant metal orb to interact with the right side. Eventually, you'll be able to notice that the orb can fit into this part of the wall, which may seem pointless until you remember that you can ascend through it. I like this use of Ascend a lot. It's not super obvious, but it's a super good solution. Once we get up here, we can finally see the orb we'll need to leave. However, it's way out of our reach. Not even Ultra Hand can get it. We do see that there is a rail for it to come to us, but it always just rolls over it. It's a bit tricky to think of what to do, but with enough experience in the game, you may already know that Recall has a much larger reach than Ultra Hand. So by stopping the orb and then letting go of it while it's over the second railing, it will actually drop down onto it and then we can grab it. I really like this solution here. It requires a decent amount of knowledge on the game's mechanics. Once you get the orb, you can try and get it across to the start, but uh-oh, it's too small. That's where our old friend Metal Orb comes in. Since it's a bit bigger, it will be able to ride the rails without falling, so by attaching the orb to it, we can get across the gap. Once we do that, it's as simple as detaching the orb and putting it into the holder to finish the shrine. I really like the puzzles in this one. I think it uses Ascend, Ultra Hand, and Recall in really creative ways, and I'm happy they could all mix together for this shrine. I also like the use of the metal orb, as it's used for several different things instead of just being a one-time item. I think this was overall a really strong puzzle shrine. 19. Buried Light. This shrine starts off with a room containing 4 sand piles and a locked door that we need a key to open. Luckily, there's a fan in here that's been inflicted by the Pharaoh's curse, which we can cure by using Ultra Hand. Seeing as this is the only other thing in the room, we can figure out that it's what we need to use to get rid of the sand piles. After blowing all the sand away, we're able to find a chest containing the key underneath one of the sand piles. This means we can leave the room and put down our fan. This shrine is just getting started though, as when we enter the next room we have a mini fight against a construct. After that battle, we can see a mirror buried in the sand. Before we can get into the mirror's actual puzzle though, we need to run back and get our fan to blow away some other sand. If we go into the corner of this room, we're able to find a hidden sand pile, which after blowing it away, reveals an entirely different room. This is where the shrine's hidden chest is, and in my opinion, it's one of the best hiding spots for any shrine chest. On top of just needing to find this room in the first place, you still need to actually solve this room's own puzzle. There are two sand piles here, one with a fan and another with a construct. This construct actually has a pretty unique weapon, being the fan guster, which is meant to show that weapons can actually create wind. That's important because you'll need a wind weapon to actually unlock the chest. By using the fan in the room to get up the ledge, you'll find that there's a gear that's stuck due to another sand pile. Since there's no way to bring a fan up here, you'll need to use a weapon that can create wind in order to open the chest, which as I said was shown to you by the construct. They went super hard with this chest for no reason. Like most of the game's shrine chests are super simple in comparison. I'm a big fan of this one. I mean, you only get like 10 arrows, but I won't judge the content. We still have to talk about the actual shrine itself though. Entering back into the main room, you'll notice that there's a ledge you can ascend through. By doing that, you'll get access to the part of the room locked behind the bars. After sniping the construct, you can come down to clear out the sand piles in this room. By doing that, you can reveal another mirror and a massive beam of light. You of course have to use the mirror to reflect this, and what you have to do is shoot the light beam through the bars. From there, all you have to do is go back into the main room and use the mirror there to reflect the beam into the light detector, allowing us to finish off the shrine. So as I'm sure you can tell by just how long I talked about this, it was absolutely fantastic. It's got one of the best chests in the game, and the main puzzle is also pretty good. The only real negative I can think of is the fact that getting rid of all of the sand piles can be somewhat tedious, but even then, not really. I'm a big fan of this one. 18. Raru's Blessing Chichim Shrine. This takes place in the ancient prison ruins beneath Gerudo Desert. After falling into the cave, you have a straightforward path where you can collect a few gems from the ores nearby. At the end of this tunnel, we have a lever that we can activate using Ultra Hand, which opens up the ruins for us. From this point on, we've got ourselves a maze. Now we have seen a few mazes before this point, so what do I think sets this one apart? Well, that's simple. It's underground, making it impossible, or at least much harder to cheese. On top of that, the setting here is more unique from the other three big mazes, since this is the only maze blessing shaped to be like a prison. The solution to get to the end here is also much more difficult, but we'll get to that when we get there. Inside the maze there are several Gibdo, which really help the atmosphere of this eerie abandoned prison, on top of just adding in some more difficulty. As you make your way through the maze, you eventually reach a Gerudo statue pointing down one of the paths, which if you follow... Okay, that was a cute little jump scare, I liked that. Anyway, there's a lever at the end here which once again opens up a new path. This time it brings you down below the prison, which contains a few more ores and enemies. By making your way through the basement section, you can reach the upper level again, before falling back down to take out the bubble frog of this cave. By turning to the side after killing it, you'll be able to notice the glow of the shrine hidden within this prison. However, it's locked behind a gate. There is luckily a room right above us though, so ascending to it will give us a chest. There's also a lever on the other side of this gate, however activating it doesn't seem to help us with the shrine. Oh well, guess there's nothing else to do in this room. From there, I spent about 6 minutes just exploring through this cave, trying to find a way into the shrine. Luckily, there is quite a lot hidden here, as many of the cells have chests or items to pick up. Eventually, though, I was getting tired of just running around aimlessly, so I was desperately trying to find some way to get into the shrine room. I probably ran in circles around 5 times before ending back up in the chest room I mentioned before. It was only then when I realized that behind the chests, I can lift the floor tiles, which reveals a hidden lever. And I'm sure you all can guess, that opens up the shrine. Despite how long I spent down here, I do honestly like that solution a lot. I think it's far more interesting than the other maze blessings in the game. So for having a really good setting, along with just being a legitimately good challenge, I think this blessing definitely deserves to be here. 17. Raru's Blessing Josh's Youth Shrine. This blessing doesn't actually require a crystal, rather this is based on a puzzle. When arriving at the location, you'll find a steward construct that will tell you, give keys born of water to the 3 altars. The sacred shrine will then appear. Now what on earth does that mean? Well, the 3 altars are pretty clearly the 3 diamond-shaped holes behind the construct, but what keys could the construct be talking about? Well, if you notice within the room, there are also a few zonite devices that you may find helpful, those being frost emitters. These are able to make ice, and since ice is water, that might just be the key it's referring to. Luckily, there is a nearby body of water, so by taking something over to freeze it, we can create 3 ice platforms. Bringing them back over to the altars, we'll discover that we're on the right track, as one of them can actually fit into the hole. Sadly, the other 2 holes are a bit smaller, so we have to figure out a way to shrink the ice platforms to fit. Luckily, there is a pile of wood right in front of the altars in this room, which we can light on fire for a source of heat. From there, we can gradually melt the ice until they fit.
Yippee!
Eventually, after placing in all the ice platforms, the shrine finally reveals itself when we can go inside and complete it. This was a really solid puzzle, every aspect of it worked extremely well. It's a good length and has a good amount of steps involved in solving it. I also like that the hint here isn't too obvious. We saw with the earlier blessing about spear throwing that hints can take a lot away from the puzzle, which is why I like this one so much more, as it doesn't spell out the solution. Keys Born of Water is still vague enough to keep the player guessing while also pointing them in the right direction, so I think this one was pretty well designed. 16. Raru's Blessing Kurikat Shrine. This is another puzzle blessing as opposed to a rock blessing. Just like the other one, you'll stumble upon a steward construct who will give you a hint as to how to unlock the shrine. In this case, the hint is, dye the white pattern black when the sun awakens in the sky, then will the sacred shrine appear. When I first got this hint, I was totally lost. I didn't think there was anything to dye in this game. Okay, well you can dye armor, I'm just a little stupid. Well then I started to think that maybe it didn't mean to literally dye something, but instead just changing something from white to black. But that leaves the question, what? Well, next to the steward construct there's this doohickey, which clearly means something, but it's not exactly clear. You could turn the structure and also place wood planks inside of it. There also happens to be a pattern on a nearby rock face, which can maybe match up with the machine if you place the planks in just right. Well, after lining these up the best I could, a whole lot of nothing happened, so I thought there was maybe a different solution to this. And then I got terrified. Pretty close by the steward construct, we can see a white Lynel in the distance. Now also consider that enemies turn black when they die. Yeah, so I thought we might have to actually kill a Lynel to unlock this shrine, so I spent a good few moments mentally preparing myself for a fight. Oh right, I forgot about the sun awakening part. So yeah, as it turns out, my original assumption was correct, and I just needed to wait for the sun to cast a shadow onto the rock face. I really liked this puzzle, even more than the other puzzle blessing. This clue is even more cryptic, but at the same time, it's still certainly plausible for players to understand what they're supposed to do. This was also a pretty creative puzzle that's unlike anything else in the game, making this a super solid shrine. 15. A prone pathway. This shrine is a really neat concept. It's essentially just one room, but that one room has a lot to it. When you enter into this shrine, you first have to use Ascend to get to the main puzzle, which is nice as it'll be a major help in this shrine later. Once we get up there, we can see two things, a massive cube and a switch. There's no way for us to get inside the cube, so we have to hit the switch, which will reveal the entrance by spinning the cube. Once you get inside, there's another switch, and as indicated by the part above it, it'll rotate the cube vertically as opposed to the horizontal switch from before. As for the other stuff inside the cube, there are a few platforms, chests, and holes, all of which can help us on our journey to escape. From here, it's essentially just trial and error trying to use both switches to turn the cube in the right direction. You can even hit the switches multiple times to have it move in reverse. This shrine is kind of hard to explain, but I just had a lot of fun with it. Trying to figure out the best way to get all the chests, along with finding the way to escape, was pretty entertaining. I like how there are also quite a few chests here too, which gives us plenty of content to go for. Eventually, you'll be able to spin the cube in just the right way to get close enough to the ceiling and ascend out. I guess you could say this is a pretty short shrine if you know what you're doing, but since I'm stupid, I think this was a fun one. 14. Gravity and Velocity. A few times throughout this video, I've mentioned the low gravity mechanic being fun, and this shrine is all about using it. You start the shrine in a room with a ball being launched back and forth. Along with it, there's also a switch and a target. Also, this is the only room in the shrine with an easy to reach target, so the cheese isn't too bad here. Anyways, to clear that, you need to hit the target with the ball somehow, but the only thing you have is this switch. Upon hitting it, the room will shift its gravity from being normal to low gravity. Not only is this a really neat gimmick, but it's also the solution to our problem, as it makes the ball get launched into the air a bit higher, just enough to hit the target. That opens up the door to the next room, which we have to launch ourselves into. Before doing that though, we also have to make sure and grab the chest, which is in a fairly decent spot. That brings us to the second and final puzzle of this shrine. The goal is the same, as you have to hit the target with a big ball. Luckily, the target also has walls surrounding it, making bomb cheese pretty much a non-issue here. Now where we get this big ball is at first pretty unclear, until you realize you have to launch the one from the start into the room you're in. I really like it when shrines connect two puzzles together like this. That doesn't happen too much, but it's always nice when it does. Upon getting into this room, the big ball is able to activate another launcher to hit the target, but there's a bit of a problem. Launching in a low gravity will send the ball flying too far, but on normal gravity, it won't reach high enough to get over the wall. So how do we get around this? Well, there are pretty much two ways, both of which are really cool. You can either shift the gravity mid-flight so the ball's arc will have it land on the target, or you could just use recall to stop the ball over the target and have it fall in that way. I like both methods a lot. It's cool to see some more timing-based puzzles, and I think this was executed pretty well. Once the ball lands on the target, we're able to finish off the shrine, and I think it was really good. Not only were these very solid puzzles, but they had a bit of challenge behind them as well, which I greatly appreciate. 13. Aid from above. When we enter this shrine, we are met face to face with a laser. If we touch it, it'll activate a trapdoor, so we're going to want to jump over it. I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to touch this laser, right? Wouldn't it be so silly if they had a shrine where the solution was to touch the laser? Getting past that first obstacle brings us down a hallway, where we then reach a much more complicated laser layout. Luckily, with the combination of jumps and crouches, we can...
This input, calm down, there's a
Luckily, with a combination of jumps and crouches, we can make it to the other side. Then we have to use ascend through a moving platform to move on. Once we get up this ledge, we have the option of either going to the left or right. Let's start with the right path since it has a shrine chest. We first have to go under a laser and across a trap door, which gives us 2 metal cubes and the chest lock behind some bars. Now, at first I thought these metal boxes could be used to block the laser. Yeah, that was a bad idea. We actually have to use the boxes to trip the laser and open the cage. That way we're close enough to open the chest ourselves. I like this puzzle a lot for the chest, and I think it works out very well. Now that we've got the chest, we can head down that left path. This puts us on a massive trapdoor with a laser coming at us. Rest in peace, metal blocks. It's luckily pretty easy to cross as you just have to jump over it. After that, we get faced with a laser at head height, which we just have to duck under. Finally, we get faced with the laser at, yeah, so no matter what you try here, whether it be crouching or jumping, you're not going to make it through. There's not even a good way to get around the lasers from the side, so how are we supposed to get through here if it's not hole-in-the-wall style? Well, if you remember a bit earlier in the shrine, I mentioned that we had to randomly ascend through a platform. While that at first may have seemed out of place, this is actually a hint towards the final solution. See, unlike the other lasers, this set has a roof moving along with it, so if you time using ascend correctly, we can go above the lasers. Yeah, I really liked that final puzzle, and this shrine as a whole. It used the lasers in really fun ways, and it was nice to try out Link's moveset while avoiding them. The chest puzzle was good, and I'd say the length was perfect as well, pretty well executed in my opinion. 12. Raru's Blessing is Shokin Shrine. This is one of the most involved shrine quests in the game, which makes sense as it's quite high up on our list. To start the quest, you'll meet this NPC named Baddock, who is in possession of a shrine rock. Sadly, he's not going to sell it to you like the guy in Terrytown, because this guy is obsessed with horses. See, he thinks you want to use it to deck out your horse, and considering he'd want to use it for his horse, he's not going to give it up so easily. Instead, he's offering a trade. He'll give away the rock if you're able to find the enormous horse in the region and bring it back to him. This then begins the hunt for the horse, which takes you to quite a few locations. First off, Baddock suggests you visit Highland Stable to get a clue. So, after getting distracted for like 30 minutes doing random garbage, you can arrive at the stable to talk to some other people. By talking to Perosa, you can get your next hint to head over to the Lakeside Stable. Now, at first I thought I completely missed the NPC we need to talk to here, but luckily he's just standing outside. Anyway, he has a bit more information on the horse. More specifically, he knows it's a giant white stallion and that 2 other people went looking for it at the Lake of the Horse God. You know, in hindsight, that name makes it pretty obvious. Well, regardless, once we travel there, we can find and talk to the 2 men the last NPC told us about. They'll give us some more information on the giant white stallion by telling us it's just a little bit ahead of them. That finally brings us to the giant white stallion itself. In order to get it to Baddock, we of course need to tame it, which we can simply do by jumping on its back and soothing it. Keep in mind that it does take quite a bit of stamina though. Now that we have the horse tamed, we have to ride it all the way back to Baddock, which is quite the long distance, but I honestly enjoyed the ride. Maybe it's just because this was literally the only time I used a horse throughout the entire game, but it doesn't matter, I still had fun. Once you finally get back to Baddock, you 2 are able to trade, giving Link the shrine rock and the ability to complete the shrine. Overall, I quite enjoyed this quest. I'm sure some people would get a bit annoyed by the dialogue here and how long it could take to move between locations, but I honestly kind of liked it. This shrine quest really felt like a small journey of its own, which I can't really say for most other shrines. There's also plenty of things along the paths to keep us occupied, like Koroks. I'm not really going to count those in the shrine's favor, but I do think it helps making this journey a bit more fun. 11. Built for Rails. In my opinion, this was probably the single hardest shrine to complete in the game. I just could not figure out what the solution was here, and granted it was like 3 AM, but still. When you enter the shrine, we see a simple rail going from one side of the room to another, so we just need to find a way across. Luckily there are some platforms, but little known fact, you can actually ride along these rails by shield surfing. I did that here because I think it's pretty fun, but don't think it'll work for long. The next area gives us 2 rails, one that leads up to a chest, so by placing platforms on it, you can reach it pretty quickly, if you don't suck. The other rail leads down to the main challenge, and since it's going downhill, we can use our shield to surf down it. Sadly, this is where shield surfing fun comes to an end because the final rail is a massive pain. First off, it goes uphill, so trying to surf on it won't go very well. It also goes so sharply uphill that you can't really walk up it either. So sadly, you have to come up with a machine to actually ride it. I know, doing the shrine in the intended way, the horror. This railing is really strange as it goes from 2 sets of rails to just 1, so you have to try and design something to get across both. This is very difficult though. I spent over half an hour here just trying out different combinations of the given platforms and fans. There are 3 fans, 3 small platforms, and 1 long one, so while there is a lot to work with, it takes a lot of time to finally come up with something that works. However, that just makes it all the more satisfying when it does. I don't think I was ever as happy completing a shrine as I was for this one. While it was definitely frustrating having to constantly rebuild my craft, finally getting it right felt so good. And nerve-wracking, that thing barely held on. If I were to give it a criticism, I kind of wish auto-build worked here, even if it was just on the stuff in the room. I get why it's not in any shrines, it would lead to way too much cheese, but I definitely felt its absence here. In the end though, this was a great shrine as it really made you use your mind to try and come up with something to escape. 10. Raru's Blessing Mea Seer Shrine. Believe it or not, this was the last shrine that I I completed. That came down to a few reasons. For starters, it's on a sky island, so I can't just use the light roots in the depths to point me to its exact spot. More importantly though, the shrine detector doesn't work on it, which made me think the chest was the only thing in here. That was made extra bad because I completely cheesed the puzzle the first time I came here using Ascent, and if I didn't, I probably would have found the shrine. Guess that's what I get for cheating. Anyway, onto the shrine itself. This takes place in a massive floating sphere, and right out of the gate, you can tell that this puzzle will be mirror focused. The platform in the center has 3 massive light beams shooting out of it, which you need to turn and shine into the room's various mirrors. This isn't as simple as one single turn though, as each mirror themselves can also be turned a bit. So your goal for the shrine is to find the best path for the light to go to get it into the detector near the center. Creating this massive web of lights was super entertaining. Moving around the sphere was also helped a lot by the low gravity and wind in the room. Once you finally get that light into the center, the shrine will spawn and you can claim your reward. This was a fantastic puzzle that I had a ton of fun with. I'm really happy this ended up being my last shrine, as it ended my run on a pretty high note.
The reward is horrifying though.
9. Raru's Blessing got Hiss's Shrine. While this is another blessing shrine to take place on the Sky Islands, this one is quite different and I definitely like it a lot. When landing on the islands, you'll first need to drain it by finding this switch.
L for these stupid fish, by the way.
Once you drain it, you'll get access to this little underground area which you need to break into. Upon getting inside, you'll notice that the area is completely dark beside the bright beam of light coming from the entrance. Right in front of you as you enter are 2 mirrors, which of course implies that you have to use them to reflect this beam of light. Only question is, where are we reflecting it to? Well, that's where we have to actually explore the cave a bit. Eventually, after rummaging through the darkness, we'll find a platform with another mirror. Now we could reflect the entrance light over here, but it's not exactly clear how that would help us. If we keep exploring, we'll find yet another mirror on a platform, but again, there's no clear spot to use it. So from here, I spent a little while just exploring the rest of this area. There's a few chests you can get here which are not only nice to find, but I think help give this shrine quest a bit of extra content. Well, after exploring, it's now time to try our hand at the actual puzzle. I reflected the light all the way to the final mirror in the chain. That also revealed to me that nearby the last mirror there is a massive hole, so I figured that it was probably the best spot to shine my light into. Inside that darkness there is actually another mirror that's facing straight down, so I shine my light into it. Upon entering into that hole and going where the light landed, we find a construct, which is pretty easy to take out, along with a place to finally give our light a destination. Also, you can grab the Zononite helm in this room, which is pretty important. The construct you fought had a mirror shield, which we can then use to finally shine our light into its detector. Once we do that, the entire room shifts, and eventually the walls open up so that the light breaks in and gets rid of the darkness. This is just an aesthetic thing, but I really liked this. I thought it was so cool. Once those walls finally open, we can see a staircase that brings us down into the shrine, which I again really like aesthetically. Overall, I loved this puzzle. It was a really great use of the mirror device. I loved linking them all together and exploring this area in general. Aesthetically too, this one was just fantastic. I love pretty much everything about this. 8. Forward or backward. This shrine is all about using recall, and while yes, we have seen several shrines do that in this video, I think this easily uses the ability the best out of any shrine. Right out of the gate, we get a pretty good example. Instead of us needing to use recall to ride back up a falling platform or something, this shrine starts out with several large boulders rolling towards us on a skinny path. What we have to do is use recall so that one of the boulders goes backwards and pushes the others upward. That's a good first obstacle to show how recall will be used in a more unique way for this shrine. That also brings us right to this shrine's chest, where it drops on a spinning circle. Based on the theme of the shrine, you of course have to use recall in the spinning circle so that the chest will fall towards you. Not the most exciting chest in the world, but it works well for the shrine. Continuing on, we have a room with a giant orb, and across a massive gap we can see its holder. The gap is too far for us to reach, so we need to find another way to get the orb across, and luckily for us, there's a small path that we can fit the orb onto. However, the path goes uphill, and there's balls rolling down it, so our orb won't be able to roll up by itself. That's where we can of course use recall again. By simply putting the orb into the path and recalling one of the balls, we can have it roll upwards and eventually land into the holder. This is again another pretty good use of recall that requires a decent amount of thinking. That brings us over to the next puzzle where we have a holder for an orb at our feet. This time though, it's the orb that's out of reach, as it's constantly rolling on a path above the holder. Lucky for us though, there just so happens to be a break in the path directly above us, so if we can find a way to make the orb fall straight down, we can get it into the holder. This is where a pretty neat use of recall comes in, because if we freeze the orb while it's in midair and then unfreeze it, the orb will fall straight down since it has no momentum. This not only requires a bit of timing, but it's also a use for recall we don't really see in most other places throughout the game. It takes a bit of creativity to realize recall would work like that to help us out, and I'm really happy they used the shrine to show off that feature. Believe it or not though, that's not the end, as we still have one more puzzle to go. In this final room, we have another orb that we have to get into a holder. The holder is quite far away, but luckily there's a moving platform with a cup that we can put the orb inside. Unfortunately though, that only moves above the holder, so how do we get the ball out of it once it's at its destination? While it may seem hopeless at first, we can of course find a way to use recall here. If we remember from the last room, releasing something from recall will remove all momentum, so we just need to get the ball frozen over the holder and then release it. So after the platform moves away from from its destination, we can use recall on the orb so it floats back over there on its own, where we can then release it to finish the puzzle. This was a fantastic way to wrap up this shrine, as it built upon using recall in such a great way. Not only were the puzzles in this shrine unique from anything else that uses recall, but there was also quite a few puzzles in here as well. This is definitely one of the longer shrines, and I really appreciate that. I kind of wish more shrines were around this length.
7. Proving Grounds Ascension.
This is my personal favorite Proving Ground shrine. The reason that comes in large part because this is essentially a two-parter. You can't just walk into it like most others, as you actually have to do something to get it to spawn. So to start the quest, you'll have to go to this Sky Island. On the island, there are not only a bunch of sledge shields, but a thing that we can activate with our arm. This places a green ring at the very bottom of the island, which also happens to be attached to a slope. It's pretty clear what this is all implying. We need to use our shield to surf down. So by using one of the given shields, or one stashed in your inventory, you can start your slide down. Of course, this is not just any shield surfing, as we're also falling from the sky. That makes this quite a lot of fun as we free fall down onto the mountain below. Once we get down there, we get to continue sliding through some more rings, which is obviously fun as well. Once we finally reach the bottom of the path, the shrine unlocks for us. This first part was already really fun, so the fact that this wasn't just a blessing makes this even better. Inside, we of course have our proving grounds, and even discounting the outside, this is one of the best proving grounds as well. Now despite the name, this isn't actually focused around using the ascend ability. Yeah, we can use it, but it's mostly about fighting in a vertical space. There are several different floors, each with a few constructs and numerous different ways to move between them. I personally decided to use the hot air balloon as it easily let me float up to the top. I personally decided to take this platform attached to the rail, which I could use recall on to get up. It didn't go all the way to the top, but it was far enough to kill some more constructs. I had a lot of fun making my way through this one. The layout was super unique, and overall it was just a great time. Definitely a highlight for a Proving Ground shrine, and throw on the extra sledding bit at the beginning and you have yourself a pretty fantastic shrine. 6. Raru's Blessing Geotack Shrine. This blessing shrine takes place inside of Isle of Rabak Gallery Cave. Since this is at Death Mountain, the cave is super hot, which as I've said before, already adds a bit of extra challenge. Alright, but what's inside of the cave itself? Well, right out of the gate we're given a minecart track which we have to ride to get deeper inside. By attaching a nearby fan to a minecart, we're ready to ride. On our way down there are a few fire keys to take out before it's revealed that this cave is way bigger than it initially seemed. There's not only a ton of open space, but also this is now over lava, making the minecart too dangerous to leave. That brings us to our first direction changer of the track, which we activate by launching a Nobo towards it. If we go where the path is leading us by default, we have to fight a fire like and we can get a chest. It's nothing crazy, but it adds some more life to this cave that I appreciate. Actually hitting the target will swap the track's direction and let us move deeper into the cavern. This eventually brings us into the main room, where the shrine quest really heats up. Get it? Because it's like hot. This is a giant circular room with a ton of minecart tracks circling a center island with octoroks and moblins. On top of that, you're not alone on these tracks, as some bokoblins will be driving by on their own minecarts trying to hit you out. Your goal is to try and make it to the center platform by swapping the track's directions while also defending yourself from all the enemies. This is not only quite a tense battle, but also a pretty unique one, as there aren't really many battles like this in the entire game. Also, it helps that I quite enjoy launching Yonobo off of vehicles. Once you take out all the enemies, there are two main destinations left. First is the bubble frog of the cave, but more importantly for us is of course the shrine. Wait, Link, look out, there's another minecart on the track! Link, look out! Now yes, you don't technically need to take the enemies out to get to the shrine itself, but I don't think it matters too much. The setting for this shrine was so cool, and I just had so much fun in this entire cave. I know some people may disagree with this being as high as it is, but I just love my time with this one, so I personally think it deserves to be here. 5. Raru's Blessing Morarian Shrine. This shrine takes place on Eventide Island, the location of Breath of the Wild's easily best shrine. While I do still think that one is a bit better than this, I can't say I'm disappointed with how this one turned out. The entire island is essentially part of the quest. You'll meet an NPC on the beach that'll help you get started. He'll explain that there are 3 monster camps on the island, so our goal is to take them all out. As I've said before, I love the combat in this game, so a shrine all about not only combat, but exploring as well is right up my alley. The first camp is inside of a fenced up area containing several bokoblins and moblins. Now the difficulty of this will of course drastically change based on what the player has, but I think it worked out pretty well. I always enjoy taking out camps like this throughout the game, so this one is no different. Poor Tooling got fried though. Camp number 2 is at the very peak of the island. When you get up there, you'll find one of the skull structures enemies like to hide in. It'll contain bokoblins and Lizalfos. Once again, I just really enjoyed fighting here. It's in a pretty good position, and the amount of enemies can make it quite tricky. The final enemy camp takes place on this big tower. This is the most unique of the camps, and it can be quite deadly too, due to the amount of room you have to work with. There are only bokoblins here, but they themselves can still be quite strong. Once you finally run around the island and taken out all the monsters, we can report back to Sasami, where he will tell us that a pirate ship has entered the backside of the island. By running over there, we can discover our 4th and final enemy camp taking place on a pirate ship. I always like taking these on, so having to do it for a shrine was fine by me. This contains both bokoblins and a boss bokoblin, though I kinda killed it before it got a chance to move. After finally taking out all the enemies, a path is clear for us to enter the shrine. Well, we do have to build a bridge, but once we do that, we can claim our reward. I just loved completing this one. It felt like it had so much more depth than most other shrines, making it stand out in my mind. I love shrines that can feel like an adventure in themselves, and this certainly delivered. 4. Raru's Blessing, Rock Shrine. Okay, this blessing is a bit complicated because the starting point here isn't 100% clear like most others. This shrine quest is an exam for the Yiga clan. What you have to do is talk to the Yiga Blade Master inside the Yiga Blade Master station, and he'll give you the locations of 5 frog statues with the Yiga logo that you need to put mighty bananas into in order to pass. These are spread out quite a bit throughout the desert, making the journey to get them all a bit of a long one. Now this is where my issue comes in, because in order to get into this area in the first place, you're required to be wearing the Yiga clan outfit. Since that's not a main story item, do I consider getting the outfit as part of the quest here? I was really unsure. I could definitely understand either perspective. For me, I decided not to include it. Again, I understand if you do, but I think this shrine is already great without it. And obviously, if the Yiga clan outfit hunt was included, this shrine would be even higher. Alright, but let's get to the parts that are definitely part of the quest, the 5 frog statues. Our first statue is luckily right outside the exit to the cave. All we have to do is jump off this bridge and we could drop the bananas right in. The next statue is a little bit deeper into the canyon. By using Tulin though, you can reach it by just gliding off the bridge we jumped off before. The next statue on the other hand is placed a bit higher up, so I teleported to a tower and glided to it from there. Be careful getting this one though, as a talus is also guarding it. I like this addition here as it makes it have a bit more danger. Our last 2 frog statues are placed within caves, making them much harder than our last 3 since we can't just go to the spot on the map to see them. Funnily enough, for the 4th statue, I already found it long before I ever started the quest, and I was really confused as to what I was supposed to do. I thought it would just require a mighty banana, but that didn't work at the time, so I just had to give up on it. At the very least, that made finally getting this a bit easier since I already saw it before. There are usually quite a few enemies in here, making the trip to get this statue once again a bit more dangerous. And our final statue can be found in the Mount Naburu cave, where it's pretty close to the entrance. Also, I tried to be cool and shoot the banana into the plate, and let's just pretend I made it. Once we finally complete the exam, we can head back to the Blade Master, who will give us our reward by revealing a door for us. This will lead us right to the shrine, ending off the quest. Overall, this one was fantastic. I loved the large variety of different locations we had to travel to. This really felt like a journey, and it was absolutely a joy to complete. That's not even considering the quest to get the Yiga clan outfit as well, which would make this place up even higher. What an absolutely fantastic shrine. 3. Bridging the Sands. Entering into this shrine, we immediately see that it's one of the most open in the entire game. This is all about the flowing quicksand making up the floor, which acts as a good obstacle throughout. We start by having to cross a gap using platforms in the sand. The amount of time you can stay above the sand before sinking is based on stamina, so if you have enough, you should be able to easily cross between the platforms without being crushed. This is a good introduction to the obstacle as it makes it very clear why it's so deadly. Once we get across, we see that we not only have to go over more quicksand, but also have to get up a wall to the other side. While it may not seem very clear at first, you could turn around and use one of the previous platforms over on this side. Personally, I think it's easiest to just use the old recall trick to get over. Once on the other side, we again have to cross another gap, but in addition, there's also a construct hiding behind a piece of wood. Also, this is where I first found out about the Gerudo bow's unique mechanic of zooming in while charging, and I was super confused. Well, anyway, once you cross the sand and climb up the ladder, you can reach the exit, but it's currently locked behind an empty holder. Not to worry though, as there's a switch right next to it that'll spawn in an orb. Aww. Okay, that was actually one of my favorite moments in any shrine. I legitimately giggled at that bit, plus it's really cool that it got its own cutscene. That doesn't really happen that much in shrines outside of a door opening. So anyway, as we saw by that, our new objective is to get over to where the orb was launched and bring it back here. It's a pretty far distance though, so there's no way we have enough stamina to cross this sand. Lucky for us, the other side of this platform has a tool that'll come in handy. We're given a sled with a fan and a control stick, which will be able to stay on the surface of the sand. On top of that, we can also get the chest here by shooting it down, and I also attached the sled to it so I could reach it with Ultra Hand. Now it's time for us to head toward the other end of this shrine. Once we get over there, we have to be careful of the nearby constructs as they could easily knock us off into the sand. Luckily though, they're pretty easy to take out. Now we have to figure out a way to actually get inside, which may seem impossible, but since this area has a lip, we can of course use Ascend. Once we get inside, we can finally grab the orb, and since there are sleds inside, we can use those to get back. There's also a switch in here to open the gate for us. Once we get over to this other side though, getting the orb into the holder isn't too easy. The only way up is with the ladder at the left and by ascending through these stairs, neither of which will get the orb up. Luckily, there is a small platform here containing 2 wood planks and some more sleds, so maybe we can somehow use them to get the orb up. I'm sure there are numerous ways you could do this, and I think I did it in the worst way possible. See, I placed one plank in the sand for me to stand on, and I used Ultra Hand to lift up the sled near the stairs. Then I used Recall once I reached the top to grab the sled. A bit overcomplicated, but hey, it worked out, and I was able to finish the shrine. I really love this one for a number of reasons. Not only was the challenge pretty good, but just the aesthetic of seeing such a big open shrine was pretty refreshing. Plus, the ball getting launched away is fantastic. fantastic. This is easily one of my favorite shrines in the game. 2. An uplifting device. This shrine is all about the hot air balloon. At first that may not seem like the most exciting element to base a shrine around, but I personally thought this was one of the most fun shrines in the game. Right as you enter, you can clearly see what the hot air balloon is capable of, as one is placed flying above a torch at the right. Using that knowledge, we have to make some sort of craft to get us up to the top of this room all the way from the bottom. Lucky for us, there are quite a few spare torches and balloons, along with a platform as well. This allows us to easily set up a craft and fly up to the next section. I didn't have my paraglider yet, by the way. This next puzzle presents us with a locked door, and right above us there's a pressure plate. Unfortunately, it's far too high for Link to reach, but there are a few— no, using Ascend won't work. But there are a few tools up here we can use, namely another torch and balloon. By placing them both under the switch, they can fly up into it to solve the puzzle. This was a really good way to use the item. It's not super obvious, and I love it when shrines come up with unique ways to use items like this. That brings us into the main room though, and this is really when the shrine picks up. We actually start at the top instead of the bottom, which lets us get an overview of the room. We see that in order to exit, we'll need to bring an orb into its holder, but we can also see that we need a second orb to get the chest. The orbs are both sadly on a much lower level though, which means we have to make something to bring them up. But there's just one problem. These orbs are almost as heavy as your mom, and one balloon isn't enough to make it up to the top. Plus, that's just one orb. If you want to bring both up, you'll definitely need some more help. Luckily, there are plenty of resources down here. Numerous torches, balloons, and heck, even flame emitters. There is only one platform to work with, but that's still enough for our goal. That does limit us though, so we have to be really creative to come up with something to get these orbs and ourselves up to the goal. This is why I love this shrine so much, because there are just so many ways you can go about this. There's so much trial and error here, and it's just a lot of fun trying to attach all of these pieces together to try and reach the goal. There are so many ways you can configure these elements together, and I'm sure everyone has their own way of doing this. So now, I think it's about time I proudly introduce my creation. Yeah, I made the most bizarre gizmo imaginable, but seeing it actually work out in the end was not only satisfying, but super fun. I absolutely adore the creativity required to beat this shrine, which is why I think it's one of the best in the game. I loved everything about this, and I really hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Again, I have like no reference for which shrines people like the best. This could easily be a bottom tier. But yeah, for me, I think this definitely deserves to be placed super high on my list. Alright, before we get into this, I just want to say right off the bat that deciding on a winner this time around was super hard. I know I said my top 2 in my Mario Odyssey moon ranking was close, but I was at least confident in my choices. For this video though, many of the game's shrines are really close quality-wise. Like in Mario Odyssey, the 2 moons I put at the top were clearly created knowing they'd be some of the best. While there are definitely standout shrines in this game, they're all much closer together. I could easily understand someone giving number 1 to a shrine I put 30 or even 40 slots lower than this. Now this can be seen as both a good and bad thing. On the one hand, it's great to have such consistently good shrines, but on the other hand, I found it harder to attach myself to particular shrines than I did particular moons in Mario Odyssey. Now granted, Mario Odyssey was out for quite a long time before I made my video, and it is my favorite game ever made, but I also feel like that top 10 would be nearly identical to a top 10 I'd make for it at launch. I mean, you get to play as Bowser in A Long Journey's End. How cool is that? Okay, sorry, I had to put Cool Bowser in, you know me. Tears of the Kingdom is different in that I could easily see myself changing on this. Heck, I did a lot during this video. Some shrines moved up around 40 places compared to my rough draft. Even while I was recording audio for this video, I decided to move a few shrines around. So all of this to say, I feel like my number 1 isn't nearly as strong of a number 1 as my Mario Odyssey video. And I think that's okay, because that means I greatly enjoyed a lot of stuff equally. This is also one of my favorite games ever made, and I think they did a fantastic job with the shrines. Really, any of this top 10 could have landed at the number 1 spot. But for right now, my number 1 choice belongs to Raru's Blessing Kahatanam Shrine. This is a shrine I'm confident most people will likely reach in their playthrough, as it's near the top of the climb to the Wind Temple. Now when I say climb, I seriously mean it, because it was a journey to get all the way up to it. This is another shrine where it's a bit hard to tell where I should consider it starting, but I think calling it the climb from this shrine up is best. Right off the bat, the temperatures is of course quite cold, so you have to keep yourself warm by either wearing clothes, equipping something hot, or eating food. This adds a bit more challenge, and I appreciate that. So starting the climb, and hey, wait a minute, aren't I supposed to have Tulin to help me? I mean, this is the way up to his temple, so this is supposed to showcase his ability to push us forward.
So shouldn't I get him first?
Nah.
Okay, since this was obviously my first blind playthrough, I didn't know about Tulin's mechanic at all. This was also my first temple, so I didn't realize I'd be able to get help from anyone. So yeah, that definitely made this more challenging for me, but at the same time, I can't say I didn't have fun. Trying to cross the large gaps without Tulin was a really good challenge that honestly boosted my opinion of this shrine. So yeah, right away we have a gap that looks near impossible to cross, but luckily there is one floating platform we can just barely snag onto to climb. This does have a construct, so we have to take it out before moving on. By jumping off the highest point on this platform, we have enough air to reach our first trampoline boat. This is an element I mentioned much earlier in the list, and it's extremely helpful here as it'll launch us super high upward. On top of that, they're also a lot of fun, which I of course like. Here we get a bit of a breather from the large gaps as we have a much bigger platform to walk on. This has a few constructs to take out and leads us to sort of a crossroads. The nice thing about this climb is that there are so many ways you can go about it, which I think adds so much to this shrine. Personally, I decided to go left and ascend through this pillar. This not only leads to another construct, but also a chest, which are also placed all over this climb, which makes it even more fun and interesting. I was able to find a nearby pillar with a small alcove, which meant that I could use ascend through it to reach an even higher position. From there, I could just barely reach the next platform to keep moving. Then I glide through a few more platforms while fighting a construct before reaching our next trampoline boat. This one has a bunch of ice covering it though, which we can get rid of by jumping. It's a small thing, but I always enjoy breaking this ice. While gliding, I decided to take a look up and yeah, we still have quite the climb to go. Before landing on the next island, we can see a flux construct in our path. Luckily you can ignore it, but I'm happy it's here for a bit of extra challenge. Personally, I decided to take it out because I just love fighting these things. Our next trampoline boat is covered once again, but this time with some destructible rocks, which we can get rid of with a bomb. After gliding from this ship, they really start to ramp up the trampolines as there are quite a few we have to jump between. That's absolutely no problem for me though, because I love platforming, but what is a problem are the enemies flying around to take us out. Just kidding, they suck at their job, we could just ignore them. Eventually, we reach a spot where we can relax a bit, as it's mostly closed off. Inside, there's some chillfin trout, along with some chill shrooms, which can be cooked at this place's pot for some meals to prevent freezing. I really appreciate this small break, and I'm sure the people relying on meals do as well. Once we're done resting, we can continue flying between a few platforms, taking out this small horde of constructs in our way. From this point on, the enemy count definitely starts to ramp up, which is good as it keeps us on our toes. This comes to a head with this final group of constructs, which are extremely deadly because they can throw zone eye bombs. After taking them out though, we can use the bombs to our advantage to reveal a chest below, which I again love to see. Then we run into a problem, a platform that is just too high for us to reach. While to some people it may seem over, there are luckily a few tools here to help us out. Making a cameo appearance from our number 2 shrine, we can use the nearby hot air balloons to float up to the next level. I appreciate them also throwing in some building for this shrine since it's mostly been platforming and routing so far. Since my batteries sucked at this point, I can't use the balloons to go too high, so I just descended through a pillar to continue. This brings us to another section where we have to jump between trampolines, but this time the boats are moving, adding on just a little bit of extra challenge. While it is very nerve-wracking because you definitely don't want to fall here, you can eventually make it over to the final ship. After you break through the ice on top, you can launch yourself up and get a clear view of the shrine. So yeah, I personally think this shrine deserves the number 1 spot. Did I make it harder on myself by not having Tulin? Yes, but the fact that it can be completed without him is what makes me like this so much. It felt really challenging making my way through this, but on top of that, this was just a fun journey to go through in general. Even if I had Tulin, this place would be extremely high, if not still number 1. I have heard some people criticize this shrine for being useless, but I personally don't see it that way. I know some wouldn't really count the climb up as part of this shrine, but rather the wind temple, but I don't know. I think the climb up really counts for this shrine, and thus I like it a lot. I had so much to talk about with this shrine compared to literally everything else, so for being such an incredible journey through the sky, I think this absolutely deserves the number 1 spot as the best shrine in Tears of the Kingdom. But anyways, I really hope you all enjoyed this video. And of course, if your favorite shrine is Combat Training Sneak Strike and you hate me for putting it low, let me know in the comments. This project has taken me months. I knew I wanted to make this video since the game came out, and I'm really happy I decided to do that because this was a ton of fun. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting it to be this long, which may sound crazy, but this somehow passed the moon ranking by several thousand words. But I don't care because I'm really happy with this. Thank you all so much for 150,000 subscribers, and by the time I get this video out, we're already well past that. It means the world to me that you all are enjoying my videos, and I can't wait to continue doing more in the future. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.